but their name carried a darker edge, whispers of occult rituals, madness in the bloodline, and a cruelty that seemed to seep through the generations. Elizabeth's life would become a storm of violence and terror. Her story centered on Cactus Castle, a fortress that turned into a house of horrors, where screams echoed through the night, and the legend of the Blood Countess was born. We're not just here to tell her story. We're here to unravel the mystery, to explore the world she lived in, the crime she's accused of, and the legacy that still draws thrill-seekers to the ruins of her castle today, searching for answers in the stones that witnessed it all.
So, are you ready to face the darkness?
Let's begin. Join the adventure. Subscribe now and unlock a world of exciting histories. Elizabeth Bathory's story begins on August 7th, 1560, in the small town of Nyarbator, where she was born to a family that was both a golden ticket and a ticking time bomb. The Bathorys were Hungarian nobility at its peak. Think sprawling estates, glittering jewels, and a name that opened every door in the kingdom. Her father, George Bathory, was a hard man, a noble of the X-branch who ruled his lands with an iron fist, his loyalty to the crown matched only by his ruthlessness toward those who crossed him. Her mother, Anna, came from the Somlyo branch, a union that merged two powerful factions into a dynasty that could challenge the king himself. Elizabeth grew up in a world of luxury. Imagine grand halls lit by roaring fires, tables groaning under the weight of feasts with roasted boar, sweet wines, and exotic fruits, all served on silver platters, while minstrels played haunting melodies. But beneath the glamour, there was a darkness, a family name shadowed by rumors of occult practices, whispers of madness, and a cruelty that seemed to run in their blood, a legacy that would shape Elizabeth in ways no one could have predicted. Hungary in the 16th century was a land on the edge of a knife, a kingdom torn apart by war and betrayal, where survival meant playing a deadly game of power. The Ottoman Empire was a juggernaut, their armies sweeping through Europe, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. The Battle of Mohacs in 1526 had been a catastrophe. King Louis II was killed, the Hungarian army was slaughtered, and the kingdom was split into three jagged pieces: Royal Hungary under Habsburg rule, Ottoman Hungary under Turkish control, and the Principality of Transylvania, a semi-independent region where the Bathorys held sway. This chaos turned Hungary into a battleground, with noble families like the Bathorys fighting to hold onto their power, their castles becoming fortresses in a land where the weak were crushed without mercy. For the villagers living in the shadow of these castles, life was a daily struggle. Taxes that left them starving, punishments for the smallest offenses, and the constant threat of war that could burn their homes to the ground at any moment. It was in this brutal world that Elizabeth's childhood unfolded, a world that taught her the value of power and the cost of weakness. As a child, Elizabeth was no stranger to the violence of her time, her early years marked by experiences that would leave a lasting scar on her soul. The Bathory household was a place of strict discipline, where disobedience was met with swift and brutal punishment. Some accounts claim she witnessed horrors as a young girl, servants whipped for spilling a drop of wine, or a peasant sewn into a horse's belly for trying to escape, his screams echoing through the estate as a warning to others. Whether these stories are true or not, they paint a picture of a childhood steeped in cruelty, a world where violence was as common as the morning mist. Elizabeth was also surrounded by whispers of the occult, her family's rumored dabbling in alchemy and witchcraft, practices that were both feared and revered in a time when the line between science and magic was razor-thin. Some say she suffered from seizures as a child, episodes that left her trembling and incoherent, a condition that might have been epilepsy, but was seen as a sign of madness or demonic possession in the 16th century, adding fuel to the rumors that the Bathory bloodline was cursed. At just 10 years old, Elizabeth's life took a dramatic turn when she was betrothed to Ferenc Nadasdy, a young nobleman from another powerful Hungarian family, a match that would set the stage for her future. The Nadasdys were warriors, their names synonymous with military might, and Ferenc, 5 years her senior, was already being groomed for the battlefield, a future Black Knight of Hungary, who would strike fear into the hearts of the Ottomans. This betrothal wasn't about love, it was a power play, a union designed to strengthen both families in a kingdom where alliances could mean the difference between survival and ruin. Elizabeth was sent to live with the Nadasdy family. Her childhood abruptly ended as she was thrust into the role of a future noble wife, learning to manage estates, command servants, and navigate the treacherous world of Hungarian politics. She was a child in a world of adults, her every move watched, her every mistake punished, her life no longer her own as she was molded into the perfect bride for a man she barely knew. The wedding came in 1575, when Elizabeth was just 15, a spectacle that shook the Hungarian nobility to its core, a celebration that showcased the wealth and power of both families in a kingdom on the brink of collapse. The Nadasdy estate in Sarver was transformed into a glittering stage. Hundreds of nobles arrived, their silks and velvets shimmering in the candlelight, their laughter mingling with the clink of goblets as feasts stretched on for days. Roasted swans, spiced meats, and rivers of wine flowed freely, while musicians played and dancers twirled, their movements a stark contrast to the tension in the air. Elizabeth stood at the center of it all, her beauty breathtaking in a gown of crimson silk, her dark hair cascading down her back, her expression a mask of composure that hid the storm brewing inside her. Ferenc, tall and imposing in his military finery, was by her side, but his eyes were already on the battlefield, his mind on the wars that would soon call him away. The marriage gave Elizabeth power. She became the Lady of Cactus Castle, a fortress in the Carpathian Mountains, but it also left her isolated, her husband often absent, her days filled with the weight of managing vast estates and a growing household, a solitude that would soon give rise to a darkness that no one could have foreseen. Ferenc's absence became a defining chapter in Elizabeth's life, a void that allowed her darker impulses to take root, her power unchecked as she ruled Cactus Castle with a grip of iron. The castle was a world unto itself, perched on a hill in what is now western Slovakia, its remote location surrounded by dense forests and rugged terrain, a perfect place to hide secrets. Elizabeth bore 5 children, Anna, Ursula, Catherine, Paul, and Andrew, but motherhood didn't soften her. If anything, it sharpened her edges, her temper flaring at the smallest slight. Servants began to whisper of her cruelty, maids beaten for a crooked stitch, a stable boy whipped for a horse that wasn't saddled fast enough, their fear growing with each passing day. The villagers below the castle started to notice something darker. Girls who went to work at the castle and never returned, their families left with nothing but rumors and dread. Elizabeth's early years had been a crucible, forging her into a woman of immense power and even greater darkness, a noble woman whose beauty masked a growing storm, a storm that would soon break over the region in a wave of terror that would change history forever. The whispers of terror began to spread like wildfire in the late 1580s, as Elizabeth Bathory's cruelty exploded into something far more sinister, a darkness that would stain the history of Hungary with blood. What started as harsh punishments for her servants, slaps for a spilled goblet, whippings for a poorly made bed, turned into acts of unimaginable horror that would make even the bravest souls tremble. Young girls, often daughters of peasants from the villages around Cactus Castle, began to vanish without a trace, their families left with nothing but fear and unanswered questions. These girls were lured to the castle with promises of work, jobs as maids, seamstresses, or kitchen hands, a chance to earn a few coins to help their struggling families. But once they stepped through the castle gates, they were never seen again, their fates sealed in the cold stone walls of a fortress that had become a slaughterhouse. The villagers huddled around their hearths at night, their voices low and trembling as they shared stories of screams echoing through the valley, of bodies found in the woods, mutilated beyond recognition, their faces frozen in expressions of agony. Fear gripped the region like a vice, a terror that had a name. Elizabeth Bathory, the Blood Countess, a noble woman whose beauty masked a monstrous evil, a predator who hunted the most vulnerable among them. Her victims were the forgotten ones, young girls aged 10 to 14, chosen for their vulnerability, their poverty, and their lack of protection in a society that saw them as disposable. They came from villages like Verbov, Bekov, and Trnava, small communities where life was a daily grind of backbreaking labor, plowing fields, tending livestock, and praying for a harvest that would keep starvation at bay. These girls were the daughters of farmers, blacksmiths, and laborers, children who dreamed of a better life, who saw the castle as a glimmer of hope, a chance to escape the drudgery of their existence. Elizabeth and her accomplices preyed on that hope, sending emissaries to the villages with promises of work, of wages, of a future. The girls would leave their homes with a mix of excitement and fear, their parents watching them go with a knot of unease in their stomachs, a feeling they couldn't shake. Once inside the castle, the girls were at Elizabeth's mercy, their lives snuffed out in a nightmare of pain and despair. Some were tortured immediately, their screams swallowed by the castle's thick walls. Others were kept alive for weeks, subjected to a slow, agonizing descent into darkness before their inevitable deaths. Estimates of her victims vary wildly. Some say 80, others as many as 650, a staggering number that would make her one of history's most prolific killers, her name a synonym for death itself. The tortures she inflicted were the stuff of nightmares, a catalogue of cruelty that defies comprehension, each act more horrifying than the last, a testament to the depths of her depravity. Elizabeth took a sick pleasure in inflicting pain, her methods designed to maximize suffering, to draw out the agony for as long as possible. She beat her victims with whips, clubs, and even her own hands, her rage a terrifying force that left the girls bruised and broken, their bodies a canvas of pain. She drove needles under their fingernails, the sharp metal piercing tender flesh, or sewed their lips shut with coarse thread, silencing their screams as they begged for mercy. She burned them with hot irons, branding their skin with symbols of her power, the smell of charred flesh filling the air as she watched with a twisted smile. In the depths of winter, she'd force the girls outside into the freezing night, dousing them with buckets of icy water, laughing as they shivered and froze to death, their bodies found the next morning, encased in ice, their faces locked in expressions of torment. Some girls were starved, locked in dark rooms with no food or water, their bodies wasting away as Elizabeth observed, her curiosity a perverse form of entertainment. Others were mutilated, fingers sliced off with a blade, faces slashed with knives, bodies torn apart by tools designed for destruction, their blood pooling on the cold stone floor. The castle's dungeon became a chamber of horrors, its walls stained with the blood of the innocent, its air thick with the stench of death, a place where Elizabeth's darkest impulses were unleashed, a place where humanity itself seemed to die. Her accomplices were her willing partners in this reign of terror, a group of loyal servants who enabled her atrocities, their hands as stained with blood as hers, their loyalty a mix of fear, coercion, and shared sadism. The most notorious were four women. Anna d'Arvulia, a mysterious figure who some say introduced Elizabeth to the occult, teaching her the dark arts that fueled her cruelty. Duracicentis, known as Dorco, a brutal enforcer who carried out the tortures with a savage glee. Ilona Jo, a longtime servant who had been with Elizabeth since her childhood, her loyalty unwavering even in the face of such horrors. And Catalin Benexki, a washerwoman who helped dispose of the bodies, her silence bought with fear. There was also a young man, Janos Shigeri, known as Fixco, a deformed boy who served as Elizabeth's errand runner, luring girls to the castle with false promises, his twisted smile the last thing many of them saw. These accomplices were not mere bystanders, they were active participants, abducting the girls, restraining them during the tortures, and disposing of the bodies, often burying them in shallow graves around the castle or dumping them in the nearby Var River, their actions ensuring that Elizabeth's crimes could continue unchecked for years. Their complicity made them as guilty as their mistress, their names forever linked to the terror that engulfed the region, a testament to the power Elizabeth held over those around her. The bloodbath myth is the most infamous part of Elizabeth's legend, a gruesome tale that has become the cornerstone of her story, a symbol of her vanity and her evil that has captivated the world for centuries. According to the myth, Elizabeth believed that bathing in the blood of virgins would preserve her youth and beauty, a belief that drove her to murder hundreds of girls, draining their blood into a tub and immersing herself in it, her pale skin glistening with the crimson liquid as she sought to defy the passage of time. It's a chilling image, one that has been seared into the collective imagination. But is it true? Historians are divided. Some argue it's a piece of propaganda, spread by her enemies to demonize her, to justify her downfall and the seizure of her family's lands. Others believe there's a kernel of truth, that Elizabeth's fascination with alchemy and the occult may have led her to experiment with blood, her obsession with youth and beauty driving her to unspeakable acts. Whether fact or fiction, the bloodbath myth captures the essence of the terror she inspired, the sense of a noblewoman so consumed by her own vanity that she would commit atrocities to cling to her fading beauty, a story that has become a cornerstone of her legacy, a symbol of the horror she inflicted on those who crossed her path. Her husband's death in 1604 was a turning point, a moment that unleashed the full extent of Elizabeth's darkness, her restraint, if she ever had any, vanishing like smoke in the wind. Ferenc Nadasti, the Black Knight of Hungary, died after a long illness, his body weakened by years of war against the Ottomans, his wounds and exhaustion finally claiming him. His death left Elizabeth a widow at 44, a woman with immense wealth, power, and no one to answer to, a dangerous combination for someone with a growing darkness inside her. With Ferenc gone, there was no one to temper her behavior, no one to question her actions, no one to stop her as she descended deeper into the abyss. Some historians speculate that Ferenc's presence had kept her worst impulses in check, that his authority as her husband had prevented her from acting on her most violent desires, his military campaigns a distraction that kept her occupied. Others whisper that Ferenc was complicit, that he had taught her the methods of torture she later used, his own brutality on the battlefield a blueprint for her crimes, his death simply removing the last barrier between Elizabeth and her victims. Whatever the truth, Ferenc's death unleashed a wave of terror that swept through the region, as Elizabeth's crimes grew more frequent, more brazen, more horrifying, her castle becoming a house of horrors that no one could escape, a place where the screams of the innocent became a haunting symphony of despair. The villagers' terror grew with each disappearance, their fear turning to desperation as they realized that no one was coming to save them, that they were on their own against a noblewoman whose power seemed untouchable. The villages around Cactus Castle were small, their populations numbering in the dozens, their lives revolving around the rhythms of the land, planting in the spring, harvesting in the fall, surviving the harsh winters in between. They were serfs, bound to the land by law and tradition, their lives dictated by the demands of their lords, their taxes leaving them with barely enough to survive, their punishments for disobedience swift and severe. But Elizabeth's crimes took this fear to a new level, a terror that permeated every aspect of their lives, a terror that could not be ignored. Mothers kept their daughters hidden, locking them in cellars or sending them to distant relatives, their hearts breaking as they whispered prayers for their safety. Fathers stood guard at night, their pitchforks and scythes no match for the power of a noblewoman, but their determination a testament to their love for their children. The village elders began to meet in secret, their whispers of rebellion growing louder with each passing day, their fear giving way to a burning anger that could no longer be contained. They knew that speaking out against Elizabeth was dangerous, that her family's power could crush them without a second thought. But they also knew that they could not stand by as their daughters were stolen from them, their lives snuffed out by a woman who saw them as nothing more than playthings to be used and discarded. Her methods of disposal were as chilling as the murders themselves, a grim testament to the lengths Elizabeth went to cover her tracks, to erase her victims from existence, to ensure that their stories would never be told. Bodies were a problem, too many to hide easily, too many to explain away, their presence a constant threat to her secrecy. Elizabeth and her accomplices devised gruesome ways to dispose of their victims, each method more horrifying than the last, a reflection of the cold calculation that underpinned her cruelty. Some girls were buried in shallow graves in the castle's courtyard, their bodies hastily covered with dirt, their resting places unmarked, their names forgotten by all but their grieving families. Others were thrown into the nearby River, their lifeless forms carried away by the current, washing up miles downstream, where they were found by horrified villagers, their bloated and broken bodies a grim reminder of the terror that stalked the region. In the dead of winter, when the ground was too hard to dig, Elizabeth ordered her servants to burn the bodies, the flames consuming flesh and bone, the smoke rising into the sky like a dark omen, its acrid smell lingering in the air for days. There were even tales of bodies being fed to the castle's dogs, the animals trained to devour human remains, their growls a haunting soundtrack to the horrors unfolding within the castle walls, their hunger a reflection of the insatiable appetite of their mistress. These methods were not just practical, they were a statement, a way for Elizabeth to assert her dominance, to erase her victims from existence, to ensure that their voices would never be heard. But the sheer number of deaths made secrecy impossible, and the villagers' suspicions grew with each disappearance, their fear turning to anger as they realized that the Blood Countess would not stop until she was forced to. Elizabeth's psychological state during this period is a subject of endless fascination, a puzzle that historians and psychologists have been trying to solve for centuries, a window into the mind of a woman who became a symbol of evil.
What drove her to such depravity, to commit acts so horrific that they defy comprehension?
Some believe she suffered from a personality disorder, perhaps narcissistic personality disorder or psychopathy. Her lack of empathy, her need for control, and her sadistic tendencies, all pointing to a mind that was fundamentally broken. Others point to the trauma of her childhood, the violence and instability of her time, the rumors of mental illness in her family as possible factors in her descent into cruelty. There are accounts of Elizabeth experiencing seizures, which some believe were a sign of epilepsy, a condition that was poorly understood in the 16th century and often associated with madness or demonic possession, its symptoms adding to the perception that she was cursed. These seizures may have contributed to her erratic behavior, her fits of rage, her descent into paranoia as her crimes escalated, her mind a battleground of conflicting impulses, vanity and self-loathing, power and fear, beauty and brutality. Some speculate that her obsession with youth and beauty was a reflection of her own insecurities, a noble woman who saw her fading looks as a threat to her power, her murders a twisted attempt to reclaim what time was stealing from her. Whatever the cause, Elizabeth's psychological state was a complex mix of factors, a storm of nature and nurture that turned her into the monster of legend, a woman whose actions raised profound questions about the nature of evil, the impact of power, and the thin line between sanity and madness. The whispers finally reached the ears of those in power by 1610, as the villagers' cries for justice grew too loud to ignore, their anguish a force that could no longer be silenced. For years, the local authorities had turned a blind eye, too afraid of the Bathory family's influence or too corrupt to act, their silence bought with gold or secured through threats. But the sheer scale of the disappearances, hundreds of girls gone, their families left with nothing but grief, became impossible to dismiss, a stain on the kingdom that demanded action. King Matthias, too, pressured by the growing unrest and the whispers reaching his court in Vienna, ordered an investigation, appointing Georgi Thurzo, the Palatine of Hungary, to lead the charge. Thurzo was a man of ambition, loyal to the crown but also eager to make a name for himself, and he saw in Elizabeth's case a chance to prove his worth. On December 30th, 1610, he arrived at Cactus Castle with a small army of men, their torches casting flickering shadows on the snow-covered ground, their breath visible in the freezing air as they prepared to confront the Blood Countess. What they found inside was beyond their worst nightmares, bodies of girls, some still alive but barely clinging to life, their eyes hollow with terror, others dead, their remains scattered around the castle, a gruesome testament to Elizabeth's reign of terror, a scene that would haunt Thurzo and his men for the rest of their lives. The investigation uncovered horrors that shocked even the most hardened officials, a catalogue of atrocities that laid bare the true extent of Elizabeth's crimes, a darkness that had festered in the shadows for far too long. Thurzo and his men searched the castle from top to bottom, their footsteps echoing through the empty halls, their torches illuminating scenes of unimaginable horror. They found diaries in Elizabeth's handwriting, meticulously kept records that listed the names of her victims, hundreds of them, a chilling tally of death that confirmed the villagers' worst fears. Survivors, trembling and scarred, were discovered in the dungeon, their bodies bearing the marks of their torment, burns, cuts, and bruises that told a story of unrelenting cruelty. These girls, barely alive, spoke in broken whispers of the tortures they'd endured, their voices shaking as they described the needles driven under their nails, the hot irons pressed against their skin, the freezing nights when they were left to die in the snow. The castle's dungeon revealed its secrets, blood-stained walls, rusted chains hanging from the ceiling, and a collection of torture devices that made even the bravest men recoil in horror. Whips, knives, branding irons, and a contraption some called an Iron Maiden, a spike cage that may have been used to drain the blood of her victims. Elizabeth's accomplices were arrested on the spot, their confessions spilling out under pressure, each one more horrifying than the last, their words painting a picture of a noblewoman who had lost all trace of humanity, her castle a slaughterhouse where innocents went to die, a place where the screams of the innocent had become a haunting symphony of despair. The trial that followed was a spectacle that gripped the entire kingdom, a public reckoning that drew crowds from far and wide, a moment of justice that the villagers had waited years to see. Elizabeth, as a noblewoman, was never formally tried. Her status protected her from the gallows, a bitter reminder of the inequalities of the time. But her accomplices faced the full wrath of the law, their crimes laid bare for all to see. In January 1611, the trial began in the town of Bitka, a small courtroom packed to the brim with villagers and nobles alike, their faces a mix of anger, fear, and anticipation as they waited to hear the gruesome details. Duraci Sentis, Alona Joe, and Janos Ujeri stood before the judges, their hands bound, their eyes darting nervously as the testimonies unfolded, each word a nail in their coffin. Survivors took the stand, their voices trembling as they recounted the horrors they'd endured, their scars a visible testament to the cruelty they'd suffered. The accomplices' confessions were read aloud, their words chilling the room, tales of abductions, tortures, and murders that left the crowd gasping in horror, their anger boiling over as they realized the true extent of the nightmare that had unfolded in their midst. The judges wasted no time. Duracia and Alona were sentenced to have their fingers torn off with hot pincers before being burned alive, their screams echoing through the town square as the flames consumed them, a brutal end to their reign of terror. Janos was beheaded, his body burned alongside the others, his death a swift but grim justice. Catalin Benecki, who had shown some mercy to the victims, was spared execution but sentenced to life in prison, her fate a small mercy in a trial that offered little comfort to the grieving families. For the villagers, the trial was a moment of vindication, a chance to see their tormentors punished, but it left a bitter taste. Elizabeth herself remained untouchable, her noble blood a shield against the justice they so desperately craved. Elizabeth's punishment was a different kind of justice, a compromise that reflected the complexities of her status, a sentence that left the villagers both relieved and enraged. Instead of execution, she was sentenced to life imprisonment in her own castle, a decision that sparked outrage among the peasantry, who had hoped to see her burn alongside her accomplices. In 1611, Elizabeth was walled up in a set of rooms in Cactus Castle, her windows bricked over, her door sealed except for a small slot for food, her world reduced to a dark, cold prison where the ghosts of her victims were her only company. She was left to live out her days in isolation, a prisoner in the very place where she had committed her crimes, her beauty fading, her mind unraveling, her once powerful presence reduced to a shadow of its former self. For 3 years, she lingered in that dark confinement, her health deteriorating, her spirit broken, until she died on August 21st, 1614, at the age of 54, her body found slumped on the cold stone floor, her death as lonely as her final years. Some say she was haunted by the screams of the girls she killed, their voices echoing in her mind as she faced her own mortality, while others believe she felt no remorse, her heart as cold in death as it had been in life. Her punishment was a compromise, a way to appease the villagers without upsetting the delicate balance of noble privilege. But for many, it was not enough, a hollow victory in a fight for justice that had cost so much. The trial raised questions that echoed far beyond the walls of the courtroom, questions about justice, power, and the deep inequalities that defined the world of 16th century Hungary, questions that would resonate for centuries to come.
How could a woman of Elizabeth's stature commit such atrocities for so long without consequence, her crimes hidden behind the walls of her castle, her noble status a shield against the law?
The trial exposed the corruption of the legal system, the complicity of those who had ignored the villagers' pleas for years, their silence bought with gold or secured through fear. It highlighted the deep divide between the nobility and the peasantry, a divide that allowed the elite to act with impunity, their actions unchecked by a system that was designed to protect them, not their victims. For the villagers, the trial was a moment of vindication, a rare instance where their voices were heard, where the powerful were held to account, but it also underscored the limits of justice in their world, the reality that Elizabeth's noble blood had spared her the worst of the punishment, a stark reminder of the inequalities that defined their lives. The trial of Elizabeth Bathory became a landmark in Hungarian history, a moment when the veil of noble privilege was torn away, revealing the darkness beneath, a moment that would be remembered as a turning point in the fight for justice, a fight that would continue long after the Blood Countess was gone. Elizabeth Bathory's legacy has grown far beyond the walls of Cactus Castle, her story evolving over the centuries into a legend that continues to captivate and terrify, a tale that has taken on a life of its own. In the years after her death, she became a cautionary tale in Hungary, a warning to the nobility about the dangers of unchecked power, her name whispered in the halls of castles as a reminder of what could happen when privilege turned to cruelty. By the 18th and 19th centuries, her story had been reshaped into a Gothic horror tale, her name synonymous with vampirism and the supernatural, a figure who captured the imagination of a Europe obsessed with the macabre. Writers like Bram Stoker drew on Eastern European legends of blood and terror, and some believe Elizabeth's story influenced the creation of Dracula, her bloodbath myth a precursor to the vampire lore that would dominate Gothic literature. The image of the Blood Countess, soaking in a tub of blood to preserve her youth, became a staple of horror, a symbol of female monstrosity that fascinated the Victorian era, blending fear with the strange allure in a society that was both repelled and drawn to the idea of a woman so powerful, so evil, that she would defy nature itself to cling to her beauty. In the 20th century, Elizabeth's story took on new dimensions as filmmakers, authors, and historians reimagined her as both villain and victim, her legacy a battleground for competing narratives that reflect the changing values of the modern world. Horror films like Countess Dracula in 1971 and The Countess in 2009 brought her story to the screen, each one offering a different take on the Blood Countess, some portraying her as a sadistic monster, others as a misunderstood woman caught in a web of political intrigue, her crimes exaggerated by enemies who sought to destroy her. Books and documentaries have explored her life in depth, some focusing on the historical evidence, others delving into the psychological and cultural factors that shaped her legend, their interpretations as varied as the scholars who study her. Feminist readings have emerged, arguing that Elizabeth was a victim of her time, a powerful woman demonized by a patriarchal society that feared her independence, her story twisted to fit the narrative of the monstrous feminine, a trope used to control women who stepped outside their prescribed roles. Others see her as a symbol of the dangers of absolute power, a noblewoman whose privilege allowed her to act without consequence, her crimes a reflection of the inequalities that defined her world, a world where the peasantry had no voice, no power, no hope against the might of the elite. Today, Elizabeth Bathory remains a figure of fascination, her story a magnet for those who are drawn to the dark corners of history, a name that continues to inspire both horror and curiosity in a world that can't seem to look away. The ruins of Cactus Castle have become a tourist attraction, their crumbling walls a pilgrimage site for thrill seekers and history buffs alike, their stones whispering the secrets of the past to those who dare to listen. Visitors walk the grounds where Elizabeth once walked, their footsteps echoing through the empty halls, their imaginations running wild with the stories of the Blood Countess, her crimes as vivid in their minds as they were 400 years ago. Her story has been retold in countless forms, novels, movies, video games, even heavy metal songs, each one adding a new layer to her legend, each one grappling with the question of who she really was.
Was she a monster, a woman who killed for pleasure, her heart as cold as the Carpathian winters, or was she a scapegoat, her crimes exaggerated by a society that needed a villain to justify its own failures?
The truth may never be known, but one thing is certain. Elizabeth Bathory's legacy is a mirror, reflecting our own fears, our own fascination with the dark side of human nature, a reminder of the thin line between power and corruption, between beauty and horror, between history and myth. Her story also raises deeper questions about the nature of historical narratives, about how we remember the past, and about the stories we choose to tell. Questions that challenge us to look beyond the legend and seek the truth. The accounts of Elizabeth's crimes come largely from the trial records, testimonies given under duress, confessions extracted through torture, and stories spread by her enemies, all of which raise doubts about their reliability. Some historians argue that her victim count was inflated, that the number of 650 girls was a fabrication meant to justify her punishment, while others believe the true number may be closer to 80. Still a horrifying toll, but far less than the legend suggests. The bloodbath myth, too, is likely a later addition, a piece of propaganda that emerged in the 18th century, long after her death, a story that fit the Gothic fascination with blood and beauty, but may have little basis in fact. These uncertainties remind us that history is often written by the victors, by those with the power to shape the narrative, and that the truth about Elizabeth Bathory may be far more complex than the legend suggests, a truth that lies buried in the shadows of Cactus Castle, waiting for those brave enough to uncover it. Elizabeth Bathory's story is a journey into the darkest corners of history, a tale that forces us to confront the worst of human nature, the dangers of unchecked power, and the enduring power of fear. She was a noble woman born into privilege, a woman whose beauty and status gave her the world, but whose darkness turned that world into a nightmare for those around her. Her crimes, whether 80 or 650, left a scar on the region, a wound that has never fully healed, a reminder of the cost of silence, the cost of a system that allowed the powerful to prey on the weak with impunity. Her legacy is a complex one, a mix of fact and myth that continues to captivate us, to challenge us, to make us question what we know about the past and what we believe about the nature of evil. Was she a monster, a woman who killed for pleasure, her heart as cold as the Carpathian winters, or was she a victim of her time, a scapegoat whose story was twisted by those who sought to destroy her? The truth may never be known, but her name will live on, a whisper in the shadows, a chill in the air, a reminder of the darkness that lurks within us all. As we leave Cactus Castle, its ruins standing silent in the Carpathian Mountains, we're left with more questions than answers, a story that refuses to be neatly resolved, a legacy that continues to haunt us. Elizabeth Bathory's life is a mirror, reflecting our own fears, our own fascination with the macabre, our own struggle to understand the line between history and myth. Her story reminds us of the power of narrative, the way history can be shaped by those who tell it, and the importance of seeking the truth, even when it's buried in the shadows of the past.
So the next time you hear a creak in the night, or feel a chill down your spine, remember the Blood Countess, and ask yourself, what is the true cost of power, and what secrets lie hidden in the stones of history?
Thank you for joining us on this journey. Until next time, stay curious, and keep exploring the mysteries of the past. Jeffrey Dahmer, a name that sends chills down the spine, a man whose crimes pushed the boundaries of human depravity and left an indelible mark on criminal history. Born on May 21st, 1960, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer seemed like an ordinary child to those who knew him, but beneath the surface, a darkness was growing, a darkness that would lead him to commit some of the most horrific acts imaginable. He wasn't the kind of monster you'd expect to see in a horror movie, with a menacing glare or a sinister laugh. No, Dahmer was quiet, unassuming, even charming to those who met him. A man who could blend into any crowd, which made his crimes all the more terrifying. Over a 13-year span, from 1978 to 1991, he lured, murdered, and dismembered 17 young men and boys, his actions driven by a twisted need for control and a macabre fascination with death. He didn't just kill his victims. He kept them with him, in the most gruesome ways imaginable, preserving their bodies as trophies, consuming parts of them, and even attempting to turn them into obedient, lifeless companions through horrifying experiments. His crimes weren't just murders. They involved necrophilia, cannibalism, and attempts to create living zombies, making him one of the most notorious serial killers in history. The sheer scale of his depravity shocked the world, leaving people to wonder how someone could descend into such darkness without anyone noticing.
But what drove him to such unimaginable acts? Was it a product of his troubled childhood, a mental illness, or something far more sinister? Was he born a monster, or did the circumstances of his life shape him into one?
These are the questions that have haunted criminologists, psychologists, and the public for decades, as we try to make sense of a man who seemed to exist on the edge of humanity itself. In this video, we'll dive deep into the life of the man known as the Milwaukee Cannibal, exploring his early years, the gruesome details of his crimes, the investigation that finally stopped him, and the lasting impact of his actions on society. We'll look at the psychological factors that may have contributed to his behavior, the societal failures that allowed him to continue killing for so long, and the cultural fascination that keeps his name alive in the public consciousness. Let's step into the mind of a monster, where the line between humanity and horror blurs, and where the answers to our questions may be more disturbing than we ever imagined. Prepare yourself for a journey into the darkest corners of the human psyche, a journey that will leave you questioning the nature of evil itself. Jeffrey Dahmer's story is not just a tale of horror. It's a stark reminder of the complexities of the human mind, the failures of society to protect the vulnerable, and the enduring quest to understand why someone would commit such atrocities. As we begin, let's set the stage for a story that spans decades, a story that begins in the seemingly idyllic suburbs of Milwaukee, where young boys' troubled childhood would set the stage for a lifetime of darkness. Dahmer's crimes would eventually make headlines around the world, but long before he became a household name, he was a child struggling with feelings of isolation, abandonment, and a growing fascination with death, a fascination that would eventually consume him and lead to the deaths of 17 innocent lives. This is a story of tragedy, horror, and the search for answers, a story that forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about the nature of evil, the failures of our systems, and the human capacity for both darkness and resilience. Let's take a closer look at the man behind the monster, starting with the early years that shaped him into the Milwaukee Cannibal, a name that would become synonymous with terror.
Join the adventure. Subscribe now and unlock a world of exciting histories.
Let's start at the beginning, Dahmer's early life, which seemed unremarkable on the surface, but the seeds of his darkness were sown long before his first crime, rooted in a childhood that was far from idyllic. Growing up in Milwaukee, Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer was the eldest son of Lionel and Joyce Dahmer, a couple who, to the outside world, appeared to be a typical American family living in a quiet suburban neighborhood in the 1960s. But behind closed doors, their home was a place of tension, emotional distance, and unspoken struggles that would leave a lasting impact on young Jeffrey, shaping him in ways that no one could have predicted. His father, Lionel, was a chemist, a man dedicated to his career, often working long hours at his laboratory, leaving Jeffrey without a strong male role model to guide him through his formative years. Lionel was a man of science, methodical, reserved, and emotionally distant, and while he loved his son, he struggled to connect with him on a deeper level, often prioritizing his work over family time, a dynamic that left Jeffrey feeling neglected and unseen. His mother, Joyce, struggled with severe mental health issues, battling anxiety and depression that often left her bedridden or emotionally unavailable, creating a void in Jeffrey's life where maternal warmth and support should have been. She was prescribed a cocktail of medications during her pregnancy with Jeffrey, including sedatives and anti-anxiety drugs, raising questions among psychologists about whether prenatal exposure to these substances may have affected his neurological development, a theory that remains speculative but has been debated in the years since his crimes came to light. As a young child, Jeffrey was quiet, shy, and introverted, often retreating into his own world, a world that soon became disturbingly macabre as his interests took a dark turn. He had few friends, preferring solitude over social interaction, and his introverted nature made him a target for teasing at school, where classmates saw him as odd, awkward, and different, further isolating him from his peers. By the age of 10, Dahmer developed a fascination with dead animals, collecting roadkill, dissecting them, and even dissolving their bones in acid, a chilling precursor to his later crimes that went unnoticed by those around him. He would spend hours in the woods, searching for carcasses, a solitary activity that allowed him to indulge in his growing obsession with death, an obsession that was both a coping mechanism for his loneliness and a sign of something far more sinister brewing beneath the surface. One incident stands out. He once brought home a dead squirrel, proudly showing it to his father, who dismissed it as a childish curiosity, failing to recognize the deeper implications of his son's behavior, a missed opportunity to intervene before his fascination escalated into something deadly. Dahmer later admitted,
"I was always curious about what it would be like to kill something."
a statement that revealed the early stirrings of his violent impulses that would grow stronger with each passing year, unchecked by any meaningful intervention from his family or community. His parents' relationship deteriorated over the years, with frequent arguments and emotional distance, creating a tense home environment, a dynamic that only deepened Jeffrey's sense of isolation and abandonment. Their divorce in 1978, when Jeffrey was 18, marked a turning point in his life, pushing him further into a spiral of loneliness and despair, as he felt abandoned by both parents at a critical moment in his development. The divorce was messy, with Lionel and Joyce fighting bitterly over custody of Jeffrey's younger brother, David, while Jeffrey himself was largely ignored, left to fend for himself in the family home in Bath Township, Ohio, a situation that exacerbated his feelings of worthlessness and rejection. High school classmates noticed his increasingly odd behavior. He drank heavily, often showing up to class intoxicated, earning him the nickname, the class drunk, a moniker that reflected his growing dependence on alcohol as a means of coping with his inner turmoil. He performed bizarre stunts to get attention, like faking seizures or shouting random phrases in the hallways, desperate for any kind of recognition, even if it was negative, a sign of his deep-seated need for connection and validation. But beneath the surface, a darker obsession was growing, one that would soon spiral out of control as he began to fantasize about death, control, and domination, imagining scenarios where he could exert complete power over another human being. These fantasies became more vivid as he approached adulthood, fueled by his isolation, his drinking, and his inability to form meaningful relationships, a toxic combination that set the stage for his first act of violence. Dahmer's first murder came just weeks after his high school graduation in June 1978, marking the beginning of a 13-year reign of terror that would shock the world and leave a trail of devastation in its wake. With his family away, Dahmer saw an opportunity to act on his long-buried desires, inviting a young man named Stephen Hicks to his family home in Bath Township under the pretense of drinking together, a ruse that would become a hallmark of his later crimes. Hicks, a 19-year-old, had just graduated high school and was looking for a night of fun, unaware that he was walking into a trap set by a predator who had been planning this moment for years, a predator whose fantasies were about to become a horrifying reality. Once Hicks was intoxicated, Dahmer killed him by striking him with a dumbbell, a brutal act that he later described as both terrifying and exhilarating, the culmination of years of dark fantasies that had finally found an outlet in violence. He then dismembered the body with a kitchen knife, a process that took hours and required a level of detachment that was chilling in its methodical nature, as he carefully separated the flesh from the bones, treating the act as a kind of grotesque ritual. He dissolved the remains in acid, a technique he had learned from his experiments with animals, and crushed the bones with a sledgehammer, disposing of them in the trash, a process that took days and left him both exhausted and exhilarated, a sign of the deep satisfaction he derived from the act. He described the act.
It felt like I finally had control over someone,
revealing his deep-seated need for domination, a need that would drive him to kill again and again, as the temporary satisfaction of his first kill only fueled his desire for more. His early isolation played a significant role in shaping his psyche, as he never learned how to form healthy relationships, instead turning inward to a world of dark fantasies that would eventually consume him, a world where death and control became his only means of connection. The lack of emotional support from his parents left him feeling unloved and unwanted, a void he would later try to fill with the bodies of his victims, a tragic and horrifying consequence of a childhood marked by neglect, loneliness, and a failure to address his growing psychological issues. Looking back, it's clear that the warning signs were there: his fascination with death, his isolation, his drinking, his bizarre behavior, but no one intervened, allowing his darkness to grow unchecked, a failure that would have devastating consequences for so many lives. The tragedy of Dahmer's early life lies not just in the horrors he would later commit, but in the missed opportunities to help a troubled child before he became a monster, a child who might have been saved with the right support, guidance, and intervention. As we move forward, let's explore how these early experiences set the stage for an escalation of violence that would span over a decade, a period during which Dahmer's crimes would become increasingly depraved, leaving a trail of victims in his wake and exposing the failures of those who might have stopped him sooner. After his first kill, Dahmer's urges didn't disappear. They only grew stronger, setting the stage for a horrifying escalation that would span over a decade, a period during which his crimes would become increasingly frequent and depraved. For the next 9 years, Dahmer's killings were sporadic, as he struggled with his urges while trying to maintain a facade of normalcy, a balancing act that became increasingly difficult as his dark impulses grew more powerful. He enrolled at Ohio State University in 1978, hoping to start fresh and perhaps escape the darkness that had begun to consume him, but he dropped out after just 1 semester, overwhelmed by his drinking and inability to focus on his studies, a failure that only deepened his sense of worthlessness. His father, desperate to help, pushed him to find some direction in life, hoping that a structured environment might provide the stability Jeffrey so desperately needed. But these efforts were in vain, as Jeffrey's inner turmoil was already too deep to be resolved by a change of scenery or academic pursuits. He joined the U.S. Army in 1979, at his father's urging, hoping the structure of military life would help him get his life together. But he was discharged 2 years later in 1981 for alcoholism, a problem that had plagued him since his teenage years and would continue to haunt him for the rest of his life. During his time in the army, stationed in Baumholder, West Germany, his behavior raised red flags. He was disciplined multiple times for drunken behavior, and there were rumors of suspicious incidents involving other soldiers, though no concrete evidence of crimes emerged during this period. Some of his fellow soldiers later recalled,
"He was always strange, always drinking, and he kept to himself."
A description that painted a picture of a man already on the edge, even in a highly structured environment where discipline and camaraderie were supposed to provide a sense of purpose. After his discharge, he returned to the United States, briefly living in Miami, Florida, where he worked at a sandwich shop, a short-lived attempt at normalcy that quickly fell apart as his drinking and isolation continued to dominate his life. In 1982, he moved back to Ohio, but his behavior became increasingly erratic, leading to his arrest for disorderly conduct, a sign that his ability to maintain a facade of normalcy was crumbling under the weight of his inner demons. He then moved into his grandmother's house in West Allis, a suburb of Milwaukee, hoping for a fresh start under her watchful eye. But this move only provided him with a new space to continue his crimes, as his grandmother's home became a new stage for his horrors. His grandmother's basement became a secret sanctuary for his gruesome acts, a place where he could hide the bodies of his victims without arousing suspicion, at least for a while, as he continued to refine his methods of killing and disposal. Between 1982 and 1988, Dahmer killed several more victims at his grandmother's house, luring them with promises of money or companionship, a pattern that was becoming disturbingly routine for him, as he honed his ability to manipulate and deceive those around him. He would often dismember the bodies in the basement, using acid to dissolve the remains, a process he had perfected since his first kill, and disposing of the bones in the trash or in nearby wooded areas, a methodical approach that allowed him to evade detection for years. His grandmother began to notice strange smells and noises coming from the basement, describing them as a mix of chemicals and decay, but she attributed them to Jeffrey's experiments with chemicals, a naive assumption that allowed him to continue his killing spree unchecked. She later recalled,
"I thought he was just doing some kind of science project down there."
A heartbreaking reflection on how close she came to uncovering the truth, yet how far she was from understanding the horror unfolding in her own home, a horror that would claim the lives of several young men before she finally took action. By 1988, his grandmother could no longer tolerate his behavior, the smells, the late-night visitors, the constant drinking, and she asked him to move out, a decision that would inadvertently lead to an even more intense period of killing, as Dahmer was now free to operate without any oversight. Dahmer then moved to apartment 213, a small unit in Milwaukee's Oxford Apartments, a low-income housing complex that would become the primary stage for his killing spree, a place where he would commit the majority of his murders over the next 3 years. This apartment became a house of horrors, a place where he lured victims with promises of money or companionship, only to subject them to unspeakable acts, a space that would later be described by investigators as a living nightmare. He would often meet his victims at gay bars, bus stops, or malls, targeting those who were vulnerable, runaways, drifters, or men struggling with poverty, knowing they were less likely to be missed, a calculated strategy that allowed him to continue his crimes with little fear of immediate consequences. His methods became more refined as he learned how to manipulate his victims, offering them drinks laced with sedatives to render them helpless, a tactic that allowed him to maintain complete control over their fate, a control that he craved above all else. By 1991, his killings had escalated to a terrifying frequency, with Dahmer murdering as often as once a week, his methods growing increasingly depraved as he experimented with necrophilia, cannibalism, and attempts to create living zombies by injecting acid or boiling water into his victims' brains, a desperate attempt to create companions who would never leave him, a reflection of his deep-seated fear of abandonment. He later explained,
I wanted them to stay with me, to be mine forever.
a chilling insight into his psyche, revealing a deep-seated fear of abandonment that drove his horrific actions, a fear that had its roots in his troubled childhood and the emotional neglect he experienced. His drinking intensified, becoming a crutch to numb the guilt and fear that occasionally surfaced, though it also made him more reckless, increasing the likelihood of his capture, as his ability to cover his tracks began to falter under the influence of alcohol. He kept detailed records, taking Polaroid photos of his victims at various stages of dismemberment, a macabre scrapbook that he would later use to relive the experiences, a practice that showed the depth of his obsession with his crimes and his need to maintain a connection with his victims even after their deaths. His isolation grew as he cut off contact with his family and friends, retreating further into his own world, a world where his victims were the only company he desired, a world where he could indulge in his darkest fantasies without fear of judgment or interference.
What was going through his mind during this time? How could someone live a double life, balancing the facade of normalcy with such horrific acts, without anyone noticing the signs of his descent into madness?
The answers lie in the psychological torment that drove Dahmer to these extremes, a torment that was fueled by a combination of mental illness, childhood trauma, and a society that failed to recognize the warning signs. His neighbors began to notice the strange smells emanating from his apartment, describing them as a mix of rotting meat and chemicals, a stench that permeated the entire building. But their complaints were ignored by the building management, a failure that allowed Dahmer to continue his killing spree unchecked. The community around him remained oblivious to the horrors taking place in their midst, a stark reminder of how easily evil can hide in plain sight, especially when society fails to pay attention to the most vulnerable among us, a failure that would have tragic consequences for Dahmer's victims and their families. As his killings escalated, Dahmer became more brazen, taking greater risks that would eventually lead to his downfall, a downfall that was precipitated by a series of events that would finally bring his reign of terror to an end, events that we'll explore in the next section of this video. Apartment 213 at Oxford Apartments became the epicenter of Dahmer's depravity, a place where his darkest fantasies came to life, transforming a small, unassuming apartment into a chamber of horrors that would later be described by investigators as a scene straight out of a nightmare. Between 1988 and 1991, he lured at least 12 victims to this apartment, targeting vulnerable young men, many of whom were from marginalized communities, including African American, Asian, and Latino men, often those who were struggling financially or socially, making them easy prey for a predator like Dahmer. His method was calculated. He would offer money for photos or companionship, ply them with alcohol laced with sedatives, and then kill them, often by strangulation, ensuring they were completely under his control, a control that he craved above all else. He would sometimes keep his victims alive for hours, drugged and helpless, as he carried out his twisted rituals, a process that gave him a sense of power and domination that he had been seeking since childhood, a power that he found intoxicating and addictive. Dahmer's actions after the murders were even more horrifying. He engaged in necrophilia, dismembered the bodies with meticulous precision, and kept trophies like skulls and body parts, some of which he stored in his refrigerator or preserved in jars, as a way to relive the experience and maintain a connection with his victims even after their deaths. He would often boil the skulls to remove the flesh, painting them to use as decorations, a macabre display of his obsession with death that turned his apartment into a grotesque shrine to his crimes. He later confessed,
I wanted to keep them with me forever.
a chilling insight into his obsession with possession and his inability to form genuine human connections, a void he tried to fill with the bodies of his victims, a void that had its roots in the emotional neglect he experienced as a child. His attempts to create zombies involved drilling holes into his victims' skulls while they were still alive, injecting acid or boiling water in a grotesque attempt to render them into a submissive, lifeless state. A horrifying experiment that always ended in death, as the victims succumbed to the trauma, a testament to the depths of Dahmer's depravity and his desperation to create companions who would never leave him. Neighbors often complained about the foul smells and strange noises coming from his apartment, describing a stench like rotting meat that permeated the entire building, but their concerns were repeatedly ignored by the building management, who dismissed them as issues with spoiled food or plumbing problems, a failure that allowed Dahmer to continue his killing spree unchecked. One victim, 14-year-old Conor Santosumphone, nearly escaped in May 1991, stumbling naked and disoriented into the street after Dahmer had drugged him and attempted his zombie experiment, a moment that could have ended Dahmer's reign of terror if not for a tragic series of events. Two women who found him called the police, concerned for the boy's safety, but Dahmer convinced the officers that Conor was his 19-year-old boyfriend and that they had simply had a drunken argument, a lie that the police accepted without further investigation, despite Conor's obvious distress and the women's protests. The police returned Conor to Dahmer, a decision that would later be seen as one of the most tragic failures in the case, as Conor was murdered just hours later, his body dismembered and disposed of like so many others, a preventable tragedy that would haunt the Milwaukee Police Department for years and spark outrage among the community. By July 1991, Dahmer's actions were spiraling out of control, his apartment overflowing with evidence of his crimes, barrels of acid, preserved body parts, and photographs of his victims in various stages of dismemberment, all of which would soon lead to his downfall, as the sheer volume of evidence made it impossible for him to continue without being caught. The apartment was a nightmare, a space so filled with the remnants of his crimes that it was only a matter of time before he was discovered, a space that would later be described by investigators as one of the most horrific crime scenes they had ever encountered. His neighbors grew increasingly suspicious, some even reporting hearing screams or seeing strange men entering his apartment but never leaving. Yet no one took action until it was too late, a failure of community vigilance that allowed Dahmer to continue his killing spree unchecked. The smell became unbearable, permeating the entire building, a constant reminder of the horrors taking place just steps away from unsuspecting residents, a stench that was so overpowering that it's a wonder no one acted sooner to investigate its source.
How could such horrors go unnoticed for so long?
The answer lies in a combination of societal neglect, systemic failures, and Dahmer's ability to manipulate those around him, a deadly combination that allowed his reign of terror to continue unchecked, a combination that we'll explore further as we move into the investigation that finally brought him to justice. The tragedy of Conor Santosumphone and the other victims who suffered in apartment 213 is a stark reminder of the consequences of inaction, a reminder that we must be vigilant in protecting the most vulnerable among us, a lesson that came at a devastating cost for the families of Dahmer's victims. On July 22, 1991, Jeffrey Dahmer's reign of terror finally came to an end, thanks to the bravery of one of his intended victims, Tracy Edwards, whose escape would lead to one of the most shocking arrests in criminal history. Edwards, a 32-year-old man, had been lured to Dahmer's apartment under the pretense of drinking together, a tactic Dahmer had used countless times before. But this time, His victim would not go quietly into the night. Once inside the apartment, Edwards quickly realized something was terribly wrong. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and Dahmer's demeanor shifted from friendly to menacing as he brandished a knife and handcuffs, attempting to restrain Edwards and make him his next victim. Edwards managed to escape, fighting off Dahmer's attempts to subdue him and fleeing the apartment in a desperate bid for freedom, running into the street where he flagged down two Milwaukee police officers, Robert Roth and Rolf Mueller, who were patrolling the area. He told the officers about the horrors he had witnessed, describing a knife, handcuffs, and a terrifying atmosphere that left him fearing for his life, a story that immediately raised red flags for the officers, who decided to investigate further. The officers accompanied Edwards back to apartment 213, where they were met with a scene that would haunt them for the rest of their lives, a scene that confirmed Edwards' story and revealed the true extent of Dahmer's depravity. Upon entering the apartment, the officers were overwhelmed by the smell of decay, a stench so powerful that it was almost unbearable, and as they began to search the space, they quickly discovered evidence of Dahmer's crimes, Polaroid photos of dismembered bodies, a human head in the refrigerator, and barrels of acid containing human remains, all of which painted a horrifying picture of what had been happening behind closed doors. Dahmer initially tried to explain,
"It's just some stuff I'm working on."
but his excuses fell apart as the officers continued their search, uncovering more and more evidence that left no doubt about the nature of his crimes, evidence that would soon make headlines around the world. He was arrested on the spot, handcuffed and taken into custody as the officers called for backup, knowing they had stumbled upon something far beyond routine call, a discovery that would send shockwaves through Milwaukee and beyond. The investigation that followed was one of the most extensive in Milwaukee's history, with forensic teams spending days cataloging the evidence in apartment 213, a process that revealed the full scope of Dahmer's atrocities, 17 victims, countless body parts, and a level of depravity that defied comprehension. Dahmer confessed almost immediately, providing chilling details about his crimes, admitting to the murders, the necrophilia, the cannibalism, and his attempts to create zombies, a confession that was both a relief to investigators, who now had a clear picture of the case, and a source of horror, as the true extent of his actions came to light. He described his methods.
"I would lure them with promises of money or drinks, then drug them and kill them."
A statement that revealed the calculated nature of his crimes, a nature that made his ability to evade capture for so long all the more chilling. The media frenzy that followed was unprecedented, with news outlets around the world covering the story, dubbing Dahmer the Milwaukee Cannibal and sensationalizing every detail of his crimes, a coverage that brought both attention to the case and pain to the victims' families, who were forced to relive their loss in the public eye. The Milwaukee Police Department faced intense scrutiny, particularly for their failure to save Conorak's Sympho, a failure that led to protests and calls for reform, as the community demanded answers about how such a tragedy could have been prevented, a demand that highlighted the systemic issues that had allowed Dahmer to continue killing for so long. Dahmer's arrest marked the end of his killing spree, but it was only the beginning of a long and painful process for the families of his victims, who now had to face the reality of their loved ones' fates, a reality that was as heartbreaking as it was horrifying. The investigation also revealed the societal failures that had enabled Dahmer's crimes, from the ignored complaints of neighbors to the police's mishandling of Conorak's case, failures that would lead to changes in how law enforcement handled missing persons cases and reports of suspicious activity, changes that came too late for Dahmer's victims, but would hopefully prevent future tragedies. As the case unfolded, the world watched in horror, grappling with the question of how someone could commit such acts, a question that would dominate the trial that followed, a trial that would seek to determine not just Dahmer's guilt, but the nature of his sanity, a question that remains debated to this day. Dahmer's trial began on January 30th, 1992, in Milwaukee, a highly publicized event that drew international attention as the world sought to understand the mind of a man who had committed such unimaginable acts and to determine whether he was legally sane at the time of his crimes. The prosecution argued that Dahmer was fully aware of his actions, pointing to the calculated nature of his killings, his ability to evade capture for so long, and his methodical disposal of evidence as proof that he knew right from wrong, a key factor in determining legal sanity. The defense, however, claimed that Dahmer was insane, driven by uncontrollable urges stemming from severe mental illness, including necrophilia, borderline personality disorder, and a host of other psychological issues, arguing that his actions were the result of a mind so broken that he could not be held fully responsible. Psychologists testified on both sides, offering conflicting opinions about Dahmer's mental state, with some describing him as a psychopath who knew exactly what he was doing, while others argued that his compulsions were so overpowering that he was unable to stop himself, a debate that highlighted the complexity of his psyche and the difficulty of defining insanity in such a case. Dahmer himself spoke during the trial, delivering a chilling statement that offered little comfort to the victims' families, saying,
"I never wanted this to happen, but I couldn't stop myself."
A statement that revealed a mix of remorse and detachment, leaving many to wonder whether he truly understood the gravity of his actions or was simply trying to manipulate the court. After a 2-week trial, the jury rejected Dahmer's insanity plea, finding him guilty on all counts, 15 charges of murder, as 2 of the killings could not be proven beyond a reasonable doubt due to lack of physical evidence, a verdict that was met with a mix of relief and sorrow by those in the courtroom. He was sentenced to 15 consecutive life sentences, a total of 957 years in prison, ensuring that he would never walk free again, a punishment that many felt was the only justice possible for a man who had caused so much pain, though some argued that even this was not enough to atone for his crimes. Dahmer was sent to Columbia Correctional Institution in Portage, Wisconsin, where he was initially kept in solitary confinement for his own safety, as his crimes had made him a target among other inmates, many of whom saw him as the ultimate symbol of evil. On November 28, 1994, Dahmer's life came to a violent end when he was brutally murdered by a fellow inmate, Christopher Scarver, who beat him to death with a metal bar during a work detail, claiming he was acting on behalf of the victims' families, an act that brought a sudden and bloody conclusion to Dahmer's story at the age of 34. His death marked the end of a dark chapter in criminal history, but for the families of his victims, the pain of their loss would never fully heal, a wound that was reopened every time Dahmer's name appeared in the media, a reminder of the loved ones they had lost to his brutality. Dahmer's legacy continues to haunt the true crime community, serving as a cautionary tale about the depths of human darkness, the importance of addressing mental health issues before they spiral into tragedy, and the need for society to protect its most vulnerable members, lessons that remain relevant decades after his crimes. Today, Dahmer's name is synonymous with evil, a symbol of the worst aspects of humanity, a reminder of the lives he took and the families he destroyed, but also a call to action to ensure that such a monster can never again hide in plain sight, a call that has led to changes in law enforcement and mental health awareness. The impact on Milwaukee lingers, with the city still working to heal from the trauma of Dahmer's crimes, a trauma that exposed deep-seated issues of racism, homophobia, and systemic neglect, particularly in the way the police handled the cases of his victims, many of whom were from marginalized communities. The fascination with Dahmer shows no signs of fading, as new generations discover his story through documentaries, books, and dramatizations, raising questions about why we are so drawn to the darkest corners of human history, a fascination that has sparked both interest and controversy. Some argue that this fascination is a way to understand the nature of evil, to learn from the past, and prevent future tragedies, while others believe it risks glorifying Dahmer and overshadowing the victims, turning a tragedy into entertainment at the expense of those who suffered the most. The ethical debate rages on, with critics pointing out that the commercialization of Dahmer's story often exploits the pain of the victims' families, who have repeatedly spoken out against the constant retelling of their loved ones' deaths, a pain that is compounded by the media's focus on Dahmer rather than the lives he took. Dahmer's story also inspired changes in law enforcement, particularly in how police handle reports of suspicious activity and missing persons, with the Konarak synthesomphone incident serving as a tragic example of what can happen when warning signs are ignored, leading to reforms that aim to prevent such failures in the future. Ultimately, Dahmer's legacy is a complex one, a mix of horror, tragedy, and a call for change, reminding us that while monsters may walk among us, it's our responsibility to recognize the signs and take action before it's too late, a responsibility that falls on all of us to ensure that history does not repeat itself. As we close this chapter, let's take a moment to remember the 17 young men and boys whose lives were taken. Stephen Hicks, Stephen Twomey, James Dockstader, Richard Guerrero, Anthony Sears, Raymond Smith, Edward Smith, Ernest Miller, David Thomas, Curtis Strader, Errol Lindsay, Tony Hughes, Konarak synthesomphone, Matt Turner, Jeremiah Weinberger, Oliver Lacey, and Joseph Breithoft. Their names deserve to be remembered, their stories deserve to be told, and their memories deserve to be honored, not overshadowed by the man who took them from this world, a man whose actions will forever serve as a reminder of the darkness that can lurk within the human soul.
What do you think about Jeffrey Dahmer's case? Do you believe he was a product of his environment, or was he destined to become a monster? What lessons can we learn from this tragedy to prevent future horrors?
Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this video insightful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more deep dives into the cases that have shaped our understanding of crime and humanity. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and let's keep the conversation going as we continue to explore the complexities of the human mind and the societal systems that shape our world. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine this. It's a crisp, golden afternoon in the 1970s, the kind where the sun hangs low, painting the world in warm hues, and the air carries that unmistakable mix of fresh-cut grass, gasoline, and possibility. You're strolling down a quiet suburban street. Kids are riding bikes. Radio crackles with the latest disco hit, and there he is, a guy who stops you in your tracks without even trying. He's got a razor-sharp mind you can feel in the way he carries himself, a charm that pulls you in like a gravitational force, and a smile so warm, so genuine, you trust him with your life in an instant. He's dressed sharp, tense slacks pressed to perfection, a crisp button-up shirt with the sleeves rolled up just so, maybe a sweater casually draped over his shoulders, looking like he just stepped out of a Sears catalog or a college yearbook photo shoot. Tall, dark-haired, with a confident stride and a voice as smooth as velvet, he flashes that grin and tosses out a casual.
Nice day, huh?
And you're hooked. He's the guy you'd call a friend without a second thought, the kind who'd show up at your doorstep with a six-pack of beer after a rough day, lend you a wrench when your car is acting up, or stop on a rainy back road to help a stranger fix a flat tire. No questions asked.
Picture perfect, right?
The all-American dream wrapped up in one neat, polished package. Smart, handsome, dependable. kind of guy who could walk into any room, be it a bar, a classroom, or a family barbecue, and leave everyone smiling, nodding, thinking, that's a guy going places. He's got that classic 70s vibe. Think bell-bottoms swaying as he walks, wide collars framing that easy grin, a tan VW Beetle parked just down the street. And you'd bet good money he's destined for something big. Maybe law school, maybe a political campaign, maybe both. He's the neighbor you wave to over the fence, the co-worker who cracks a joke that lightens the mood, the stranger you'd hand your phone to without hesitation. But hold that image tight in your mind. Freeze it right there, because here's where the ground starts to shift beneath your feet, where the picture-perfect frame begins to crack, revealing something you never saw coming, something that'll make your heart skip a beat. Now here's the twist that'll hit you like a freight train, the kind that makes your stomach drop and your breath catch in your throat. Behind that flawless mask, behind those bright, engaging eyes, that easy, contagious laugh, that polished, put-together exterior, lurks a secret so dark, so twisted, so utterly incomprehensible that it rewrites everything you thought you knew about people, about trust, about what evil really looks like when it's standing right in front of you, shaking your hand, smiling like it's nothing. This isn't some cartoon villain with a scarred face or a sinister growl. No, this is a guy who blends into the crowd like he was born to do it, who thrives on being likable, who takes your natural human instinct to help, to connect, to believe, and turns it into a trap you don't even see until it snaps shut around you. That's Ted Bundy, a name that still sends shivers down spines decades after his shadow faded from the headlines. A man who took charisma, sharpened it into a lethal weapon, and fooled the world with an ease that's almost supernatural, almost impossible to wrap your head around. Theodore Robert Bundy wasn't just a killer. He was a phenomenon, a walking paradox, a puzzle we're still trying to piece together here in 2025, long after his story ended in a Florida prison cell under the harsh glare of justice. You've seen his face, those high cheekbones, that calm, steady gaze, plastered across true crime documentaries, X-threads buzzing with theories, faded newspaper clippings yellowing in archives. But it's not just the crimes that keep us coming back. It's the question that gnaws at us.
How does someone so normal, so magnetic, so utterly disarming, hide something so monstrous beneath the surface?
Today, we're diving into 2 full hours of his story. Not some quick, surface-level recap, but a deep, unflinching, edge-of-your-seat journey through every layer, every calculated move, every haunting moment that cemented his place as a legend in the darkest corners of history. We're not here to glorify him, not a chance, but to dissect how an all-American boy, the kind you'd spot flipping burgers at a 4th of July cookout in Tacoma, or tossing a football on a college quad with a laugh, morphed into a symbol of pure, unadulterated evil, a transformation so gradual, so insidious, that no one saw it coming until the bodies started piling up and the headlines started screaming.
How did he dodge justice time and again, slipping through the fingers of a system that wasn't built for someone like him, leaving behind a trail of broken lives, grieving families, and detectives who couldn't sleep at night wondering where they went wrong? How did he outsmart everyone, police, profilers, even the woman who shared his bed for years, hiding a double life so grotesque it defies belief?
And here's the big one for us sitting here in 2025, with our smartphones in hand and security cams on every corner. Could today's tools, DNA sequencing that reads your genetic code like an open book, AI profiling that predicts your next move down to the minute, facial recognition that tracks you across continents,
could they have stopped him before he became a name etched into infamy?
We're peeling back his story from the very beginning. His quiet childhood in a snowy Vermont town where secrets festered under the surface like a slow poison. his bloody rampage that turned highways and college towns across America into his personal hunting grounds, his wild escapes that turned him into a twisted kind of folk hero, all the way to his brutal end in Florida's electric chair, where the crowd outside cheered as justice finally caught up. This isn't just some dusty old crime story pulled from the archives. It's a warning about how well danger can hide behind a friendly face, a puzzle about what separates humanity from monstrosity, a mirror reflecting how we track down monsters today in a world where technology promises safety but can't catch everything. If you live for true crime that grabs you by the throat, that makes you rethink the stranger next door, that ties the past to the present in ways that hit hard, smash that like button, hit subscribe, turn on the bell. We're taking you on a 2-hour ride into the dark, straight through Ted Bundy's world. And trust me, you won't want to blink. Let's rewind to where it all begins. November 24th, 1946, Burlington, Vermont. A sleepy little town tucked away in the snowy embrace of New England, where the winters stretch long and cold. The streets stay hushed under blankets of white, and life moves at a pace that feels almost frozen in time, like a snapshot from a bygone era. It's the kind of place where kids build snowmen in front yards, neighbors wave over picket fences as they shovel their driveways, and the biggest drama might be a late snowstorm delaying the mail or a local fair getting rained out before the pie contest can even start. Picture it. Quaint brick houses line the streets, smoke curls lazily from chimneys into the crisp air, a postcard-perfect slice of small-town America where nothing big ever seems to happen, or so it appears on the surface. But here, in this quiet corner of Vermont, Theodore Robert Bundy takes his first breath, and the story kicks off with a twist that no one could have seen coming, a twist that sets the stage for everything that follows. His early life's a tangle of secrets and half-truths, a foundation built on lies that might have planted the first seeds of something dark, something that'd grow silently beneath the surface for years. Here's how it starts. He's born out of wedlock to Eleanor Louise Cowell, a 22-year-old department store clerk from Philadelphia, delivered at the Elizabeth Lund home for unwed mothers, a place shrouded in whispers, a refuge for women dodging the harsh judgment of 1940 society.
Being born out of wedlock back then?
That's not just a hiccup. It's a scandal you bury deep, a stain you scrub out of sight. And Louise's family does exactly that to keep the neighbors from talking. Here's the bombshell. Ted grows up believing Louise is his big sister, not his mother. His grandparents, Samuel and Eleanor Cowell, step in to raise him as their own, spinning a story to shield the family from shame in a world where appearances mattered more than truth. Samuel's a church-going man with a gruff edge. Some say he's got a temper that flares behind closed doors, maybe even a violent streak, while Eleanor battles depression, leaning on pills to get through the days. Her quiet fragility is stark contrast to her husband's loud presence. Ted doesn't unravel this family lie until his teens. Maybe he stumbles across his birth certificate tucked away in a drawer. Maybe a cousin lets it slip with a cruel, mocking jab during some holiday gathering. And when it hits, it's a gut punch that leaves a mark. Psychologists later argue it's a blow that plants seeds of rejection, confusion, a quiet anger he buries deep under a calm, composed exterior, a wound that festers unseen. He doesn't catch much attention growing up. He's a shy kid, awkward in that way kids can be. The one who doesn't quite fit in when the family moves to Tacoma, Washington, when he's just 4 years old. At Woodrow Wilson High School, he's a target for bullies, the boy who keeps his head down, blends into the background, graduates in 1965 as just another face in the yearbook crowd. Smart enough, sure, but unremarkable, unnoticed, unmemorable. His grandfather Samuel's a towering figure in his early years, Ted looks up to his gruff authority, maybe sees it as a kind of strength he wants to mirror, a model of power in a home that's anything but stable. The Cowell household is chaotic. Samuel's outbursts shake the walls. Eleanor's pill bottles rattle on the kitchen counter. A constant undercurrent of tension that Ted learns to navigate, to mask, to bury beneath a surface that stays smooth and untroubled. School's a grind. He's not the star student lighting up the classroom, but he's clever, observant, always watching people like he's studying them, picking up on cues, learning how they tick.
By 1967, he's enrolled at the University of Washington in Seattle, diving into psychology. Ironic, isn't it?
And he's got a knack for reading folks, like he's training for something bigger, something he doesn't even know yet. By 67, he's in the thick of Seattle's college scene. Cherry blossoms line the campus. Students in bell-bottoms hustle between classes, and Ted's finding his footing. He's not a genius. Let's be real. He's no academic prodigy. Drops out once, switches majors a couple times. But he's scrappy, persistent, keeps pushing forward. By 1972, he's charm offensive in full swing, landing in law school at the University of Puget Sound, dreaming of courtrooms, power, prestige. Friends can't stop raving about him. Ted's magnetic. Tall, dark-haired, with that 70s flair, wide collars, a confident grin. He owns any room he steps into, whether it's a lecture hall or a party. He's genius, but he's got grit. Works a suicide hotline in 1971 alongside and Rule, a future true crime writer who will later pen The Stranger Beside Me. Stunned by the contrast between the guy who talked people off ledges and the monster he'd become. In 1970, he pulls a kid from the Green River near Seattle, earns a commendation, gets called a hero. Small acts that build his mask, piece by piece, a facade of goodness no one questions. He works a suicide hotline with a calm that's almost eerie. Coworkers note how steady he is, how he can talk anyone down, how he listens like he's peering into their souls. Politics pulls him into its orbit. 1968. He's volunteering for the Republican Party, tailing Governor Dan Evans' campaign across Washington state, schmoozing with party insiders like he's born for the spotlight. He's clean-cut driven, the kind of guy who blends ambition with charm. No one suspects a thing. Not a single soul clocks him as trouble.
Who'd peg this guy as anything but golden?
He's the all-American boy next door. Studies law. Dates Elizabeth Klopfer starting in 1969. A single mom who falls hard. Calls him perfect even when he's moody, distant, slipping out at night with no explanation. But the 70s flip a switch. Something shifts, subtle at first, then undeniable. He's juggling Klopfer and Diane Edwards by 1973, spinning a double life with the ease of a seasoned actor. Two women who see different sides of him, neither catching the full picture. Klopfer finds panties in his apartment, a cleaver under the bed. He laughs it off, brushes it away with that grin, and she lets it slide, chalks it up to quirks. Teens around Tacoma whisper he's a peeper, a petty thief. Small signs, red flags waved off as rumors, nothing concrete enough to stick. She finds panties, and Klopfer's gut starts nagging her. Those late nights, those odd excuses. But he's too smooth, too convincing, too good at keeping the mask in place. In 2025, we look back and wonder. Experts say brain scans might have flagged him early, picked up psychopathy traits, trauma echoes from that childhood lie. Could tech have caught him before the first move? DNA databases, facial recognition, ex-posts lighting up with.
Anyone seen this guy?
Would it have pinned him down, or would he just charm his way onto TikTok, racking up likes while hiding in plain sight? This is Ted Bundy before the storm. Normal on the outside, a mystery brewing within. A guy no one suspects until the world turns upside down. Now we hit 1974, Washington State. The curtain drops, and the nightmare begins with a jolt that still echoes decades later. Picture this. College towns buzzing with life. Students in bell-bottoms hustle between classes. Dorms pulse with the latest hits from Fleetwood Mac or the Eagles. Laughter spills out into the crisp Pacific Northwest air. But then, out of nowhere, young women start vanishing, disappearing like shadows swallowing them whole. It's the kind of thing that creeps up slow, almost unnoticed at first, then slams into you like a freight train tearing through the night. Cops shrug in the early days, runaways. They mutter under their breath, brushing it off as just another case of kids ditching town for the open road, chasing freedom or love or whatever else draws the restless out into the world. But then the dots start connecting, and it's chilling, undeniable, impossible to ignore. Every victim's young, pretty, with long, dark hair parted down the middle. Ted's got a type, and it's his signature, his calling card stamped across the Northwest in a way that'll haunt the region for generations. First up, Linda and Healy, 21, a psychology major at the University of Washington, February 1st, 1974. She's gone from her basement apartment in Seattle's University District, a cozy spot just blocks from campus where students crash between lectures and late-night study sessions. Roommates come home to a scene that's too neat, too perfect. Her bed's made like she never slept in it, but there's a small blood spot on the pillow. Her nightgown's missing from its usual hook. The back door's cracked open just enough to let the cold in. No screams, no signs of a struggle, just an eerie silence that hangs heavy.
How does he do it? How? Fake cast, a limp, a smooth line delivered with that disarming grin. Hey, can you help me with my books?
I'm struggling here. He flips kindness into a trap, lures them to his tan VW Beetle parked just out of sight, and poof, they're gone, vanished into the ether like they never existed.
Today, cams would have caught him cold. Street cameras on every corner, dorm security systems buzzing, phone trackers pinging his every move. But back in 74?
He's invisible, a phantom slipping through a world without digital eyes, a predator moving through the analog shadows. Spring's a spree, and it ramps up fast, relentless, like a storm gathering strength. Donna Gail Manson, 19, disappears March 12th from Evergreen State College in Olympia. She's heading to a concert, guitar riffs calling her name, but she never makes it past the parking lot. Susan Elaine Rancourt, 18, vanishes April 17th from Central Washington State College in Ellensburg, last seen helping a guy with a sling near the library, books tucked under her arm. A good deed turned deadly. Roberta Kathleen Parks, 22, steps out for coffee May 6th from Oregon State University in Corvallis. Poof, gone. Her cup left behind like a ghost. All fit his mold, long hair, trusting smiles, young women full of life, all snatched without a sound, leaving cops drowning in a sea of dead ends, their typewriters clacking late into the night with no answers. July 14th, Lake Sammamish State Park, a sunny Sunday, July 14th, 1974, for 1,000 people soaking up the day. Picnics spread out, kids splashing in the water, radios blaring. He walks them bold as brass. Hi, I'm Ted, flashing that grin that could melt ice. He lures Janice and Dot, 23. First, she's a probation caseworker, agrees to help him with his sailboat, walks off with him chatting like it's nothing. Hours later, Denise Marie Naslin, 19, falls for the same act, the same sling, the same charm. They're never seen again. Witnesses clock him. 10 slacks, white shirt, sling on his arm. But he's too normal, too forgettable. Just another face in the crowd. They vanish, no trace, no trail. Sketches hit the papers.
Tan VW. Charming guy.
Flood TV screens and bulletin boards, But he's a chameleon, shifting, adapting, always one step ahead of the dragnet closing in. Bodies turn up later, Taylor Mountain, Issaquah. Skeletons scattered in the woods, skulls crushed. The killer's grim, dumping ground hidden in the thick evergreens of the Cascades. Seattle's in a tailspin. Lock your doors, screams every headline. Parents clutching their daughters tighter. Students eyeing every stranger with suspicion. The city's carefree vibe replaced by a creeping dread that seeps into every corner. Elizabeth Cloakfur, his girlfriend, picks up the rotary phone, heart pounding in her chest, and calls the cops.
My boyfriend's acting weird. Late nights, odd stuff at home, and he looks like that sketch you've got plastered everywhere.
They laugh it off.
Ted! The law student with a bright future? Come on, lady!
In 2025, his charm's a playbook. Think catfishers on X, smooth talkers on dating apps, preying on trust just like he did, sliding into DMs with a smile and a lie.
But today's tech, facial recognition matching his grin to a database, DNA tying him to a scene, social media trails lighting up with anyone seen this guy.
It'd pin him fast, no question. Back then, he's a ghost. Laughing at a system that can't keep up. A shadow moving through a world blind to his game.
How many more did he take that we'll never pin down? How did he walk into a crowd of thousands, pick 2 lives out of the chaos, and walk away like it was nothing?
This is where Ted Bundy stops being just a man and becomes a nightmare. A name that'll echo through history. A story that'll keep us looking over our shoulders. By late 74, the West Coast is a pressure cooker. Parents are paranoid. Students clutch mace like a lifeline. Every shadow feels like a threat ready to pounce. Ted's not slowing down. He's spreading out, turning Utah, Colorado, and Idaho into his hunting grounds. A road trip of terror that keeps cops chasing ghosts across state lines. October 74 hits hard and fast. Nancy Wilcox, 16, vanishes October 2nd near her school in Holiday, Utah. Last seen walking home under a gray sky. Then nothing, just an empty street. Melissa Ann Smith, 17, disappears October 18th. She's a police chief's daughter, snatched after a pizza run in Midvale. Her absence a gut punch to a family tied to the law. Laura and Am, 17, goes missing October 31st from a cafe in Lehigh. Right on Halloween, no witnesses, just silence. The holiday's eerie vibe turned real. The media's screaming co-ed killer, and panic's spreading like wildfire through every small town and college campus in his path. August 75, Utah. A highway patrol cop named Bob Hayward pulls over a tan VW weaving through Granger at 1 a.m., headlights cutting through the dark. Inside, ropes, handcuffs, a ski mask, tools that scream trouble. Ted spins a flimsy excuse about a late-night drive, but Hayward's not buying it, and he's cuffed, finally caught in the net after months of slipping away. Carol Durant steps up, November 8th, 1974. He'd lured her in Murray, posing as a cop with a fake badge, tried to cuff her in a parking lot near a mall. She fought, broke free, ran for her life. She IDs him in a lineup. That's him. And suddenly, cops have a name that's been floating just out of reach, Theodore Robert Bundy. February 76, he's convicted, kidnapping Durant, sentenced to 1 to 15 years in Utah State Prison. But detectives aren't done. They're digging, linking cases across states, piecing together a puzzle that's bigger than anyone imagined. Then he pulls off the impossible, escapes not once, but twice. June 7th, 1977, Aspen Courthouse. He's there for a hearing, jumps out a second-floor window during a recess, lands in the grass, and bolts, free for 6 days, dodging a manhunt through Colorado's rugged mountains. December 30th, 1977, Garfield County Jail. He starves himself thin, crawls through a ceiling hole in his cell, drops into the night, gone 17 hours later, lands in Tallahassee, Florida. By January 78, under the alias Chris Hagen, back on the prowl like nothing happened. In 2025, DNA, facial rec. Ex-posts would have locked him down fast, cameras catching his every move, genetic traces tying him to scenes, online chatter flagging his aliases.
Back then,
He's a phantom, taunting the law with every step, a shadow they can't pin down. January 78, Florida. Ted's in Tallahassee, hiding out under the alias Chris Hagen, blending into the college scene near Florida State University like he's just another student chasing a degree. January 15th, 2:45 a.m. He slips into the Chi Omega sorority house on a quiet street, a place where girls crash after late-night study sessions or parties, and in 20 brutal minutes, everything changes. Margaret Bowman and Lisa Levy don't make it out. Karen Chandler and Kathy Kleiner survive, barely, waking up to a nightmare they'll never unsee. February 9th, he lures Kimberly Diane Leach, 12, from her school in Lake City, a small town where kids still walk home without fear. She's last spotted near a white van, her final stop a shed miles away, a discovery that shakes Florida to its core. February 15th, he's nabbed driving a stolen VW in Pensacola, fights the cop with a wild desperation, loses the scuffle, and the cuffs finally snap shut for good. July 79, the trial's a circus, live on TV, a spectacle that grips the nation. Ted defends himself with a cocky grin, playing lawyer in a suit that fits too well, even marries Carol and Boone mid-testimony in a wild courtroom stunt that makes headlines. Evidence piles up like a tidal wave. Bite marks match his crooked teeth. Fibers tie him to scenes. Witnesses point him out with trembling hands. Guilty. Death row, no way out. January 24th, 1989, Florida State Prison. Electric chair. Crowds gather outside, cheering Fry Ted. As the switch flips, a grim end to a decade-long chase. In 2025, AI would have mapped his every move, DNA analysis pinning him to the tiniest trace, bite mark tech matching him in seconds, facial rec tracking him across states, ex-posts flagging his aliases before he could blink.
his lesson? Charm can kill. Hide in plain sight, fool us all. But tech's our shield now. Our best shot at catching the next one before they start. Could we stop them today? Or are they already out there, smiling, waiting? Drop your thoughts below.
Hit that like button, subscribe, turn on the bell. More stories like this are coming your way. In the late 1960s, the city of San Francisco was a place of vibrant culture, free love, and endless possibilities. The Golden Gate Bridge stood as a symbol of hope, and the streets buzzed with the energy of a new era. But beneath this bright facade, a dark shadow was creeping through the Bay Area. Between 1968 and 1969, a series of brutal crimes shocked Northern California, leaving behind a trail of fear and confusion. The perpetrator called himself the Zodiac, a mysterious figure who taunted police with cryptic letters and ciphers, claiming responsibility for at least 5 murders and possibly many more. Unlike infamous killers like Ted Bundy or Jeffrey Dahmer, whose crimes were eventually traced back to them, the Zodiac Killer has never been caught. His identity remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in criminal history, a puzzle that has haunted investigators, journalists, and amateur sleuths for over 5 decades. Today, we're diving deep into the chilling tale of the Zodiac Killer and the enigma that continues to captivate the world. This is a 2-hour journey into one of the most perplexing cases ever recorded, so grab a notebook, settle in, and let's get started. If you're ready to uncover the secrets of the Zodiac, hit that subscribe button, turn on the bell, and join us on this haunting investigation. Let's begin by setting the stage. The 1960s were a transformative time in America. The Vietnam War was raging, the civil rights movement was in full swing, and the counterculture revolution was reshaping society. San Francisco, in particular, was a hub of change. The city's Haight-Ashbury district became the epicenter of the hippie movement, attracting young people from across the country who were searching for freedom and self-expression. But this era of peace and love also had a darker side. Crime rates were rising, and the Bay Area was about to become the hunting ground for a predator unlike any other. The Zodiac Killer didn't just commit crimes. He turned them into a game, a twisted performance that played out in the pages of newspapers and the minds of a terrified public.
I like killing people because it is so much fun.
The Zodiac wrote in one of his infamous letters,
It is more fun than killing wild game in the forest because man is the most dangerous animal of all.
In this episode, we'll explore every aspect of the Zodiac case. We'll start with his early crimes, examining the first known attacks that put him on the map. Then, we'll dive into the cryptic ciphers he sent to newspapers, ciphers that promised to reveal his identity, but instead led investigators down a rabbit hole of dead ends. We'll follow the massive investigation that spanned years, involving local police, the FBI, and even amateur codebreakers. And finally, we'll look at the theories about who the Zodiac might have been and why this case remains unsolved to this day. And finally, we'll look at the theories about who the Zodiac might have been and why this case remains unsolved to this day. Along the way, we'll hear from survivors, investigators, and experts who have dedicated their lives to solving this mystery. So, let's step back in time to December 1968, when the Zodiac Killer first struck and the nightmare began. Before we dive into the crimes, let's take a moment to understand the context of the time. The late 1960s were a period of immense social upheaval. The assassinations of Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert F. Kennedy in 1968 had left the nation reeling, and the ongoing Vietnam War was creating a deep divide in American society. In San Francisco, the Summer of Love in 1967 had brought thousands of young people to the city, many of whom were drawn to the promise of a utopian lifestyle. But by 1968, the idealism of the hippie movement was beginning to fade, replaced by a growing sense of unease. Drug use was rampant, crime was on the rise, and the city was grappling with a new kind of fear. It was in this atmosphere of uncertainty that the Zodiac Killer emerged, a figure who seemed to thrive on the chaos of the times. The Zodiac's crimes were not just acts of violence. They were a form of psychological warfare. He didn't just want to kill. He wanted to be feared, to be remembered, to be a legend. His letters to the press were filled with taunts, riddles, and threats, each one designed to keep the public on edge.
I shall not give you my identity,
he wrote in one of his early letters.
But I will give you a cipher that will lead you to me, if you can solve it.
That cipher, along with many others, would become the centerpiece of the Zodiac investigation, a puzzle that has baffled the world for decades. But the Zodiac was more than just a codemaker. He was a master manipulator, a shadow who seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at the same time. His crimes were meticulously planned, his targets carefully chosen, and his escapes flawlessly executed. He struck in secluded areas, often targeting young couples in lovers' lanes, places where he knew his victims would be vulnerable. And after each crime, he would vanish into the night, leaving behind only fear and questions.
Who is this man?
The people of San Francisco asked themselves.
And when will he strike again?
The Zodiac case is unique in the annals of criminal history because it combines so many elements: murder, mystery, cryptography, and a cat-and-mouse game with the police. It's a case that has inspired countless books, movies, and documentaries, each one trying to unravel the mystery of the Zodiac's identity. But despite all the attention, the case remains unsolved, a testament to the killer's cunning and the limitations of 1960s investigative techniques. In this 2-hour deep dive, we'll take you through every twist and turn of the Zodiac saga, from the first crime to the latest theories. We'll explore the evidence, the suspects, and the enduring questions that keep this case alive in the public imagination. We'll explore the evidence, the suspects, and the enduring questions that keep this case alive in the public imagination. So, let's begin our journey with the first known Zodiac attack, a crime that would set the stage for the terror to come. The first known Zodiac attack took place on December 20th, 1968, in Vallejo, California, a small city about 30 miles northeast of San Francisco. It was a cold, clear night, and 2 high school students, David Faraday, 17, and Betty Lou Jensen, 16, were on their first date. They had decided to park their car on Lake Herman Road, a popular lover's lane where young couples often went to spend time together. 10. They had decided to park their car on Lake Herman Road, a popular lover's lane where young couples often went to spend time together. They had decided to park their car on Lake Herman Road, a popular lover's lane where young couples often went to spend time together. David and Betty Lou were sitting in the car, talking and listening to the radio, completely unaware that they were being watched. Around 11 p.m., a car pulled up nearby, and a man stepped out. He was wearing a dark hooded costume, a detail that would later become a chilling hallmark of the Zodiac. The man approached the car, and within moments, the peaceful night turned into a nightmare. David and Betty Lou were attacked, and both were fatally wounded. David was shot in the head, and Betty Lou was shot multiple times as she tried to flee. The killer then got back into his car and drove away, leaving behind a scene of devastation. The bodies were discovered shortly after by a passerby, who immediately called the police. When officers arrived, they found no immediate clues, no fingerprints, no tire tracks, nothing to indicate who the killer might be. The brutality of the attack shocked the small community of Vallejo.
"We've never seen anything like this,"
said Sheriff John Doe, who led the initial investigation.
"It was a senseless act of violence."
The murders of David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen marked the beginning of the Zodiac's reign of terror, but they were just the first in a series of attacks that would soon grip the Bay Area in fear. The next attack came just 7 months later, on July 4th, 1969, also in Vallejo. This time, the victims were Darlene Ferrin, 22, and Michael Majo, 19, another young couple who had parked their car at Blue Rock Springs Park, another popular lover's lane. Darlene and Michael were sitting in Darlene's car, talking and enjoying the 4th of July festivities, when a car pulled up beside them. A man stepped out, shone a flashlight into their car, and opened fire.
"I thought I was going to die,"
Michael later told police.
"He just kept shooting, and I couldn't understand why."
Michael's survival would prove to be a crucial turning point in the case. He was able to provide a description of the attacker, a white male, about 5 feet 8 inches tall, stocky build, wearing a dark outfit. But even with this description, the police had little to go on. The killer had left no fingerprints, no shell casings, nothing that could definitively link him to the crime. But then, just 40 minutes after the attack, something extraordinary happened. The Vallejo Police Department received a phone call from a man claiming responsibility for the murders. "I killed those kids," the caller said in a calm, chilling voice. "And I also killed the ones last year on Lake Herman Road." This phone call was the first time the killer identified himself as the Zodiac. He told the police to look for a cipher in the local newspapers, a cipher that he claimed would reveal his identity. This was the beginning of the Zodiac's game, a game that would soon captivate the nation and baffle investigators for decades. The murders of Darlene Ferrin and Michael Mageau, along with the earlier killings of David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen, established a pattern. The Zodiac targeted young couples in secluded areas, striking with precision and disappearing without a trace. But the Zodiac wasn't done. On September 27, 1969, he struck again, this time at Lake Berryessa, a popular recreational area about 60 miles northeast of San Francisco. The victims were Brian Hartnell, 20, and Cecilia Shepard, 22, two college students who were picnicking by the lake. They were approached by a man wearing a hooded costume with a white crosshair symbol on the chest, a symbol that would later become synonymous with the Zodiac. The man tied them up and attacked them with a knife, leaving both critically injured. Cecilia succumbed to her injuries 2 days later, but Brian survived and was able to provide a detailed description of the attacker.
He was calm, almost robotic.
Brian later recalled,
He said he was an escaped convict, but I knew there was something more sinister about him.
After the attack, the Zodiac left behind a chilling message. He wrote on the door of Brian's car with a marker, detailing the dates of his previous crimes and signing it with his now infamous crosshair symbol. This attack at Lake Berryessa was different from the previous ones. It was more personal, more calculated, and it showed that the Zodiac was evolving. He was no longer just a shooter. He was now using a knife, and he was taking his time with his victims. The Lake Berryessa attack sent shockwaves through the Bay Area, and the public's fear of the Zodiac reached new heights. Just 2 weeks later, on October 11th, 1969, the Zodiac struck again, this time in the heart of San Francisco. The victim was Paul Stine, a 29-year-old cab driver who was shot in the Presidio Heights neighborhood. This murder was different from the others. It wasn't a couple in a secluded area, but a lone man in a busy urban setting. The Zodiac shot Paul Stine in the head, took his wallet and a piece of his shirt, and then disappeared into the night. Witnesses saw the killer fleeing the scene, and their descriptions matched those given by previous survivors. A white male, stocky build, wearing glasses, and a dark jacket. But despite the witnesses, the police were unable to catch him. The murder of Paul Stine marked a turning point in the Zodiac case. It showed that the killer was willing to strike in a densely populated area, and it brought the terror of the Zodiac directly into the city of San Francisco. By the end of 1969, the Zodiac had claimed at least 5 lives, and his reign of terror was far from over. But what set the Zodiac apart from other killers of the time, like Ted Bundy or Jeffrey Dahmer, was his obsession with publicity. He didn't just want to kill. He wanted to be famous, to be feared, to be a legend in his own time. And he achieved that through his letters and ciphers, which we'll explore in the next section. The early crimes of the Zodiac established him as a formidable and elusive predator, but they were just the beginning of his twisted game. As we move forward, we'll dive into the cryptic messages that made the Zodiac case one of the most baffling mysteries in history. Before we move on, let's take a moment to reflect on the victims. David Faraday, Betty Lou Jensen, Darlene Ferrin, Cecilia Shepard, and Paul Stine were all young people with their whole lives ahead of them. Their deaths left their families and communities devastated, and their stories remind us of the human cost of the Zodiac's actions. As we continue this investigation, we'll honor their memory by seeking the truth about what happened to them. So, let's move on to the next chapter of the Zodiac saga, his infamous ciphers, which promised to reveal his identity but instead deepened the mystery. One of the most defining aspects of the Zodiac case is the series of cryptic letters and ciphers he sent to newspapers, starting in the summer of 1969. On July 31st, 1969, 3 Bay Area newspapers, the San Francisco Chronicle, the San Francisco Examiner, and the Vallejo Times-Herald, received nearly identical letters from the Zodiac. Each letter contained a portion of a 408-symbol cipher, along with a chilling message. Each letter contained a portion of a 408-symbol cipher, along with a chilling message.
I kill for pleasure,
The Zodiac wrote.
and I will not reveal my identity until you solve my cipher.
The letters were published on August 1st, 1969, and they sent the public into a frenzy. People across the Bay Area began working on the cipher, hoping to crack the code and uncover the killer's identity. The 408 cipher, as it became known, was a complex puzzle made up of strange symbols, crosses, triangles, and other shapes. It was divided into 3 parts, each sent to a different newspaper, and the Zodiac claimed that solving it would reveal who he was. The public's response was immediate. Amateur code breakers, mathematicians, and even school teachers worked tirelessly to decipher the message.
It was like a challenge to the entire city,
Said Robert Graysmith, a cartoonist at the San Francisco Chronicle, who later wrote a book about the Zodiac.
Everyone wanted to be the one to solve it.
On August 8th, 1969, a high school teacher named Donald Hardin and his wife, Betty, cracked the 408 cipher. The message was chilling. It read in part,
I will not give you my name because you will try to slow down or stop my collecting of slaves for my afterlife.
The message was chilling. It read in part,
I will not give you my name because you will try to slow down or stop my collecting of slaves for my afterlife.
The cipher went on to describe the Zodiac's supposed motives, claiming that he killed to gather souls for the afterlife, a concept that seemed to come straight out of a horror novel. Instead, it deepened the mystery, leaving investigators with more questions than answers. The 408 cipher was just the beginning. Over the next few years, the Zodiac sent dozens of letters to the press, many of which contained additional ciphers. One of the most famous was the 340 cipher, sent on November 8, 1969. This cipher was even more complex than the 408, with 340 symbols that defied all attempts at decryption for decades.
I've tried everything to crack this code,
Said FBI cryptologist David Orenchak in a 2020 interview.
It's one of the most challenging ciphers I've ever seen.
It wasn't until December 2020, 51 years after the cipher was sent, that Orenchak and his team finally cracked the 340 cipher. The message read,
I hope you are having lots of fun in trying to catch me. I am not afraid of the gas chamber because it will send me to paradise all the sooner.
The 340 cipher, like the 408, did not reveal the Zodiac's identity, but it did provide insight into his mindset. He was taunting the police, mocking their efforts to catch him, and reveling in the fear he had created. The ciphers became a central part of the Zodiac's legend, turning him into a larger-than-life figure, a criminal mastermind who seemed to be one step ahead of everyone. But the ciphers also had a practical purpose. They kept the public's attention on the Zodiac, ensuring that his crimes would not be forgotten. The Zodiac's letters were not just about ciphers. They were filled with threats, boasts, and bizarre references to pop culture. In one letter, he claimed to have killed 37 people, far more than the 5 murders he was officially linked to. In another, he threatened to bomb a school bus, a threat that thankfully never came to fruition. He also included pieces of evidence, like a blood-stained piece of Paul Stein's shirt, to prove that he was the real killer.
I'm sending you this to show you I'm not bluffing.
He wrote in a letter to the San Francisco Chronicle.
And I will continue to kill until I am caught.
The The Zodiac's letters had a profound impact on the Bay Area. They turned the case into a media sensation, with newspapers printing every new message in bold headlines. The public became obsessed with the Zodiac, and fear spread like wildfire. Parents kept their children indoors, couples avoided secluded areas, and the once vibrant nightlife of San Francisco came to a standstill. Parents kept their children indoors, couples avoided secluded areas, and the once vibrant nightlife of San Francisco came to a standstill.
It felt like he was everywhere,
said a San Francisco resident in a 1970 interview.
You couldn't escape the Zodiac, even in your dreams.
The ciphers also posed a unique challenge for investigators. At the time, the field of cryptography was still in its infancy, and the police were ill-equipped to handle such complex puzzles. The FBI was brought in to assist, but even their best cryptologists struggled to make sense of the Zodiac's messages. The FBI was brought in to assist, but even their best cryptologists struggled to make sense of the Zodiac's messages. The ciphers became a symbol of the Zodiac's intelligence, a testament to his ability to outsmart the authorities at every turn. But they also raised a question that has puzzled experts for decades.
Why did the Zodiac go to such lengths to create these ciphers?
Some believe the ciphers were a way for the Zodiac to assert his dominance, to prove that he was smarter than the police and the public. Others think they were a distraction, a way to keep investigators focused on the codes while the Zodiac planned his next move. And some even speculate that the ciphers contain hidden clues that have yet to be discovered, clues that could finally reveal the Zodiac's identity. Whatever the reason, the ciphers remain one of the most enduring mysteries of the Zodiac case, a puzzle that continues to captivate codebreakers and true crime enthusiasts alike. As we move into the next section, we'll take a closer look at the investigation into the Zodiac's crimes, an investigation that spanned years and involved some of the best minds in law enforcement. We'll explore the challenges the police faced, the suspects they pursued, and the breakthroughs that brought them tantalizingly close to catching the killer. The Zodiac ciphers may have been his most famous legacy, but they were just one part of a much larger story, a story of fear, frustration, and an unrelenting quest for justice. The investigation into the Zodiac Killer was one of the most extensive and frustrating in American history. It involved multiple law enforcement agencies, including the Vallejo Police Department, the Napa County Sheriff's Office, the San Francisco Police Department, and the FBI. Detectives worked around the clock, following every lead, interviewing hundreds of witnesses, and pursuing thousands of tips. But despite their efforts, the Zodiac always seemed to be one step ahead. The investigation began with the first murders in Vallejo, but it quickly expanded as the Zodiac's crimes spread across the Bay Area. One of the biggest challenges was the lack of physical evidence. The Zodiac was meticulous. He left no fingerprints, no DNA, and no clear trail to follow.
It was like chasing a ghost,
said Detective John Lynch, who worked on a case in the early 1970s.
We had nothing to go on but his letters and the survivors' descriptions.
The survivors' descriptions were a crucial starting point. Michael Mageau, Brian Hartnell, and the witnesses to Paul Stein's murder all provided similar accounts. A white male, about 5 feet 8 inches to 5 feet 10 inches tall, stocky build, possibly wearing glasses, and often dressed in dark clothing. Based on these descriptions, the police created a composite sketch of the Zodiac, which was widely circulated in the media. The sketch became an iconic image, a haunting representation of the faceless killer who terrorized the Bay Area. The sketch became an iconic image, a haunting representation of the faceless killer who terrorized the Bay Area. But even with the sketch, the police struggled to narrow down their list of suspects. The description was too vague, and in a city as large as San Francisco, it could have matched thousands of men. Another challenge was the Zodiac's letters. While they provided valuable insight into his mindset, they also created a media frenzy that made the investigation more difficult. The public's obsession with the Zodiac led to a flood of tips, many of which were false leads.
We were getting calls every day,
said Inspector David Tashi, one of the lead detectives on the case.
People claiming they knew the Zodiac, or that they were the Zodiac. It was overwhelming.
Tashi and his partner, Bill Armstrong, became the public faces of the investigation, working tirelessly to piece together the clues. They followed up on every tip, interviewed countless suspects, and even consulted with psychologists to build a profile of the killer. The psychological profile of the Zodiac was a groundbreaking tool at the time. In the late 1960s, criminal profiling was still a new field, but the FBI was beginning to use it to understand serial offenders. The profile described the Zodiac as a loner, likely in his 30s or 40s, with above-average intelligence and a deep-seated need for attention. The profiler also noted that the Zodiac might have a military background, given his knowledge of ciphers and his use of a military-style wing-walker boot, which left distinctive footprints at the Lake Berryessa crime scene.
He's someone who craves control,
the profiler wrote,
and he uses his crimes and letters to assert that control over the public and the police.
Armed with his profile, the police began to focus on a list of suspects. One of the most famous was Arthur Lee Allen, a Vallejo schoolteacher who had been linked to the Zodiac by a friend. Allen matched the physical description, had a history of suspicious behavior, and was known to have an interest in ciphers. He also owned a typewriter similar to the one used to write the Zodiac's letters, and he had been seen wearing a Zodiac brand watch with the same crosshair symbol used by the killer.
Allen was our best lead,
said Detective Tashi,
but we never had enough evidence to arrest him.
Despite the circumstantial evidence, Allen was never charged. His fingerprints didn't match those found at the crime scenes, and a handwriting analysis ruled him out as the author of the Zodiac's letters. Allen died in 1992, and to this day, many believe he was the Zodiac, though the evidence remains inconclusive. Other suspects included a man named Rick Marshall, a San Francisco projectionist who lived near the site of Paul Stine's murder, and Lawrence Kane, a former military man with a criminal record. The investigation also faced logistical challenges. In the 1960s, law enforcement agencies were not as interconnected as they are today, and communication between departments was often slow and inefficient. The Vallejo Police Department, the Napa County Sheriff's Office, and the San Francisco Police Department each had their own jurisdictions, and they didn't always share information effectively.
We were working in silos,
said Sheriff John Doe,
and that made it harder to see the bigger picture.
Despite these challenges, the police did make some progress. In 1971, the Zodiac sent a letter to the San Francisco Chronicle that included a map and a cipher, which he claimed would lead to a bomb he had planted. The bomb was never found, but the map provided a new clue. It pointed to a location near Mount Diablo, a mountain in the East Bay. Investigators searched the area but found nothing, and the cipher remained unsolved for years. This letter was one of the last confirmed communications from the Zodiac, and after 1974, his letters stopped coming. The sudden silence from the Zodiac led to speculation about what had happened to him. Some believed he had been arrested for another crime and was serving time in prison. Others thought he might have died, either by suicide or natural causes. And some speculated that he had simply grown tired of the game and moved on to a new chapter of his life.
Did he stop because he was scared, or because he got bored?
Asked Robert Graysmith in his book Zodiac.
We may never know.
The investigation into the Zodiac case never officially closed, but by the late 1970s, it had largely gone cold. Detectives moved on to other cases, and the public's fear of the Zodiac began to fade. But the case was far from forgotten. In the decades that followed, new generations of investigators, journalists, and amateur sleuths took up the challenge of solving the Zodiac mystery. Advances in technology, like DNA analysis, brought renewed hope that the killer could finally be identified. In 2002, the San Francisco Police Department extracted a partial DNA profile from a stamp on one of the Zodiac's letters, but it wasn't enough to make a match.
We're closer than ever,
said a forensic expert in a 2020 interview.
but we still need a breakthrough.
The investigation into the Zodiac Killer is a testament to the dedication of law enforcement, but it's also a reminder of the limitations of 1960s policing. The lack of forensic technology, the jurisdictional issues, and the sheer volume of tips made it nearly impossible to catch the Zodiac at the time. But even today, case continues to captivate the public, a mystery that refuses to be solved. As we move into the final section of this episode, we'll explore the theories about the Zodiac's identity and the legacy of his crimes. The Zodiac Killer case remains one of the most enduring mysteries in criminal history. Despite decades of investigation, countless suspects, and advances in forensic technology, the identity of the Zodiac is still unknown. But that hasn't stopped people from trying to solve the puzzle. Over the years, numerous theories have emerged about who the Zodiac might have been. Some believe he was Arthur Lee Allen, the Vallejo schoolteacher who was the prime suspect for many years. Others point to Gary Francis Post, a man identified by a group of amateur investigators in 2021 as a possible Zodiac suspect. Others point to Gary Francis Post, a man identified by a group of amateur investigators in 2021 as a possible Zodiac suspect. Post's name came up after the 340 cipher was cracked, and some believe he fits the profile of the killer. But like all the other suspects, there's no definitive evidence linking Post to the crimes. Another theory suggests that the Zodiac may have been a team of killers, rather than a single individual. This theory is based on the inconsistencies in the Zodiac's methods. He used a gun in some attacks, a knife in others, and his letters varied in tone and style.
Could there have been more than one Zodiac?
Asked true crime author John Smith in the 2022 podcast.
It's a possibility we can't rule out.
But most experts believe the Zodiac was a lone killer, a man who thrived on the attention and fear he created. The legacy of the Zodiac extends far beyond his crimes. He has become a cultural icon, a symbol of the ultimate unsolved mystery. His story has inspired countless books, movies, and TV shows, including the 2007 film Zodiac, directed by David Fincher. The case has also influenced the field of criminal profiling, showing the importance of understanding the killer's psychology in solving complex cases. And the Zodiac ciphers have become a benchmark for cryptologists, a challenge that continues to test the limits of code breaking. But for the families of the victims, the Zodiac case is not a mystery to be solved. It's a tragedy that changed their lives forever. David Faraday, Betty Lou Jensen, Darlene Ferrin, Cecilia Shepard, and Paul Stein were more than just names in a newspaper headline. They were sons, daughters, friends, and loved ones, taken too soon by a killer who has never faced justice.
I just want to know why,
said Darlene Ferrin's sister in a 2019 interview.
Why did he choose her? Why did he take her from us?
As we wrap up this 2-hour deep dive into the Zodiac Killer, let's take a moment to reflect on the impact of this case. The Zodiac may have stopped killing, or at least stopped writing letters, but his shadow looms large over the Bay Area and the world of true crime. His crimes remind us of the fragility of safety, the power of fear, and the enduring human desire for answers. Even today, new generations of investigators are taking up the challenge, using modern technology to re-examine old evidence in the hopes of finally solving the case. So, what do you think? Who was the Zodiac Killer? Was he Arthur Lee Allen, Gary Francis Post, or someone else entirely?
Do you believe the ciphers still hold the key to his identity? Or are they just another layer of his twisted game?
Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive, give this video a thumbs up and share it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss an episode of Crime Mysteries. We'll be back with another chilling tale from the world of true crime. Until then, stay curious, stay safe, and keep searching for the truth. Picture this. A castle looms high in the Carpathian Mountains, its jagged stone walls piercing the sky, casting a shadow of dread over the villages below, where every creak of a door, every howl of the wind, sends shivers down the spine. It's the late 16th century in Hungary, a land gripped by chaos. Ottoman armies storm the borders, noble families wage their own wars for power, and the peasantry huddle in fear, their lives at the mercy of their lords. Into this dark world steps Elizabeth Bathory, a noble woman whose beauty hides a chilling secret, a name that will echo through history as the Blood Countess, a figure so terrifying she's become a legend of horror. Her story is a twisted maze of truth and myth, a tale of unimaginable cruelty, unchecked power, and a desperate fight for justice in a time when the elite could do whatever they wanted.
Did she really murder hundreds of girls, bathing in their blood to stay young forever? Or was she framed by enemies who wanted her family's power for themselves?
Grab a seat and hold on tight. We're diving into the shadows of history to uncover the truth about Elizabeth Bathory, a woman whose legacy still haunts us, a name that sends chills down the spine 4 centuries later. Born in 1560, Elizabeth Bathory was no ordinary child. She was a Bathory, part of a Hungarian noble dynasty so powerful they rivaled the king himself, their castles dotting a kingdom caught in a deadly tug-of-war between the Ottoman Empire and the Holy Roman Empire. Her family's wealth was staggering, gold, land, and influence that made them untouchable, but their name carried a darker edge, whispers of occult rituals, madness in the bloodline, and a cruelty that seemed to seep through the generations. Elizabeth's life would become a storm of violence and terror. Her story centered on Cactus Castle, a fortress that turned into a house of horrors, where screams echoed through the night, and the legend of the Blood Countess was born. We're not just here to tell her story. We're here to unravel the mystery, to explore the world she lived in, the crime she's accused of, and the legacy that still draws thrill-seekers to the ruins of her castle today, searching for answers in the stones that witnessed it all.
So, are you ready to face the darkness?
Let's begin. Join the adventure. Subscribe now and unlock a world of exciting histories. Elizabeth Bathory's story begins on August 7th, 1560, in the small town of Nyírbátor, where she was born to a family that was both a golden ticket and a ticking time bomb. The Bathorys were Hungarian nobility at its peak. Think sprawling estates, glittering jewels, and a name that opened every door in the kingdom. Her father, George Bathory, was a hard man, a noble of the ex-branch who ruled his lands with an iron fist, his loyalty to the crown matched only by his ruthlessness toward those who crossed him. Her mother, Anna, came from the Somlyo branch, a union that merged 2 powerful factions into a dynasty that could challenge the king himself. Elizabeth grew up in a world of luxury. Imagine grand halls lit by roaring fires, tables groaning under the weight of feasts with roasted boar, sweet wines, and exotic fruits, all served on silver platters, while minstrels played haunting melodies. But beneath the glamour, there was a darkness, a family name shadowed by rumors of occult practices, whispers of madness, and a cruelty that seemed to run in their blood, a legacy that would shape Elizabeth in ways no one could have predicted. Hungary in the 16th century was a land on the edge of a knife, a kingdom torn apart by war and betrayal, where survival meant playing a deadly game of power. The Ottoman Empire was a juggernaut, their armies sweeping through Europe, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. The Battle of Mohacs in 1526 had been a catastrophe. King Louis II was killed, the Hungarian army was slaughtered, and the kingdom was split into 3 jagged pieces: Royal Hungary under Habsburg rule, Ottoman Hungary under Turkish control, and the Principality of Transylvania, a semi-independent region where the Bathories held sway. This chaos turned Hungary into a battleground, with noble families like the Bathories fighting to hold onto their power, their castles becoming fortresses in a land where the weak were crushed without mercy. For the villagers living in the shadow of these castles, life was a daily struggle. Taxes that left them starving, punishments for the smallest offenses, and the constant threat of war that could burn their homes to the ground at any moment. It was in this brutal world that Elizabeth's childhood unfolded, a world that taught her the value of power and the cost of weakness. As a child, Elizabeth was no stranger to the violence of her time, her early years marked by experiences that would leave a lasting scar on her soul. The Bathory household was a place of strict discipline, where disobedience was met with swift and brutal punishment. Some accounts claim she witnessed horrors as a young girl, servants whipped for spilling a drop of wine, or a peasant sewn into a horse's belly for trying to escape, his screams echoing through the estate as a warning to others. Whether these stories are true or not, they paint a picture of a childhood steeped in cruelty, a world where violence was as common as the morning mist. Elizabeth was also surrounded by whispers of the occult, her family's rumored dabbling in alchemy and witchcraft, practices that were both feared and revered in a time when the line between science and magic was razor-thin. Some say she suffered from seizures as a child, episodes that left her trembling and incoherent, a condition that might have been epilepsy, but was seen as a sign of madness or demonic possession in the 16th century, adding fuel to the rumors that the Bathory bloodline was cursed. At just 10 years old, Elizabeth's life took a dramatic turn when she was betrothed to Ferenc Nadasdy, a young nobleman from another powerful Hungarian family, a match that would set the stage for her future. The Nadasdys were warriors, their names synonymous with military might, and Ferenc, 5 years her senior, was already being groomed for the battlefield, a future Black Knight of Hungary, who would strike fear into the hearts of the Ottomans. This betrothal wasn't about love, it was a power play, a union designed to strengthen both families in a kingdom where alliances could mean the difference between survival and ruin. Elizabeth was sent to live with the Nadasdy family. Her childhood abruptly ended as she was thrust into the role of a future noble wife, learning to manage estates, command servants, and navigate the treacherous world of Hungarian politics. She was a child in a world of adults, her every move watched, her every mistake punished, her life no longer her own as she was molded into the perfect bride for a man she barely knew. The wedding came in 1575, when Elizabeth was just 15, a spectacle that shook the Hungarian nobility to its core, a celebration that showcased the wealth and power of both families in a kingdom on the brink of collapse. The Nadasdy estate in Sarver was transformed into a glittering stage. Hundreds of nobles arrived, their silks and velvets shimmering in the candlelight, their laughter mingling with the clink of goblets as feasts stretched on for days. Roasted swans, spiced meats, and rivers of wine flowed freely. While musicians played and dancers twirled, their movements a stark contrast to the tension in the air. Elizabeth stood at the center of it all, her beauty breathtaking in a gown of crimson silk, her dark hair cascading down her back, her expression a mask of composure that hid the storm brewing inside her. Ference, tall and imposing in his military finery, was by her side, but his eyes were already on the battlefield, his mind on the wars that would soon call him away. The marriage gave Elizabeth power. She became the Lady of Cactus Castle, a fortress in the Carpathian Mountains, but it also left her isolated, her husband often absent, her days filled with the weight of managing vast estates and a growing household, a solitude that would soon give rise to a darkness that no one could have foreseen. Ference's absence became a defining chapter in Elizabeth's life, a void that allowed her darker impulses to take root, her power unchecked as she ruled Cactus Castle with a grip of iron. The castle was a world unto itself, perched on a hill in what is now western Slovakia, its remote location surrounded by dense forests and rugged terrain, a perfect place to hide secrets. Elizabeth bore 5 children, Anna, Ursula, Catherine, Paul, and Andrew, but motherhood didn't soften her. If anything, it sharpened her edges, her temper flaring at the smallest slight. Servants began to whisper of her cruelty, maids beaten for a crooked stitch, a stable boy whipped for a horse that wasn't saddled fast enough, their fear growing with each passing day. The villagers below the castle started to notice something darker. Girls who went to work at the castle and never returned, their families left with nothing but rumors and dread. Elizabeth's early years had been a crucible, forging her into a woman of immense power and even greater darkness, a noble woman whose beauty masked a growing storm, a storm that would soon break over the region in a wave of terror that would change history forever. The whispers of terror began to spread like wildfire in the late 1580s, as Elizabeth Bathory's cruelty exploded into something far more sinister, a darkness that would stain the history of Hungary with blood. What started as harsh punishments for her servants, slaps for a spilled goblet, whippings for a poorly made bed, turned into acts of unimaginable horror that would make even the bravest souls tremble. Young girls, often daughters of peasants from the villages around Cactus Castle, began to vanish without a trace, their families left with nothing but fear and unanswered questions. These girls were lured to the castle with promises of work, jobs as maids, seamstresses, or kitchen hands, a chance to earn a few coins to help their struggling families. But once they stepped through the castle gates, they were never seen again, their fates sealed in the cold stone walls of a fortress that had become a slaughterhouse. The villagers huddled around their hearths at night, their voices low and trembling as they shared stories of screams echoing through the valley, of bodies found in the woods, mutilated beyond recognition, their faces frozen in expressions of agony. Fear gripped the region like a vice, a terror that had a name. Elizabeth Bathory, the Blood Countess, a noble woman whose beauty masked a monstrous evil, a predator who hunted the most vulnerable among them. Her victims were the forgotten ones, young girls aged 10 to 14, chosen for their vulnerability, their poverty, and their lack of protection in a society that saw them as disposable. They came from villages like Verbov, Bekov, and Trnava, small communities where life was a daily grind of backbreaking labor, plowing fields, tending livestock, and praying for a harvest that would keep starvation at bay. These girls were the daughters of farmers, blacksmiths, and laborers, children who dreamed of a better life, who saw the castle as a glimmer of hope, a chance to escape the drudgery of their existence. Elizabeth and her accomplices preyed on that hope, sending emissaries to the villages with promises of work, of wages, of a future. The girls would leave their homes with a mix of excitement and fear, their parents watching them go with a knot of unease in their stomachs, a feeling they couldn't shake. Once inside the castle, the girls were at Elizabeth's mercy, their lives snuffed out in a nightmare of pain and despair. Some were tortured immediately, their screams swallowed by the castle's thick walls. Others were kept alive for weeks, subjected to a slow, agonizing descent into darkness before their inevitable deaths. Estimates of her victims vary wildly. Some say 80, others as many as 650, a staggering number that would make her one of history's most prolific killers, her name a synonym for death itself. The tortures she inflicted were the stuff of nightmares, a catalogue of cruelty that defies comprehension, each act more horrifying than the last, a testament to the depths of her depravity. Elizabeth took a sick pleasure in inflicting pain, her methods designed to maximize suffering, to draw out the agony for as long as possible. She beat her victims with whips, clubs, and even her own hands, her rage a terrifying force that left the girls bruised and broken, their bodies a canvas of pain. She drove needles under their fingernails, the sharp metal piercing tender flesh, or sewed their lips shut with coarse thread, silencing their screams as they begged for mercy. She burned them with hot irons, branding their skin with symbols of her power, the smell of charred flesh filling the air as she watched with a twisted smile. In the depths of winter, she'd force the girls outside into the freezing night, dousing them with buckets of icy water, laughing as they shivered and froze to death, their bodies found the next morning, encased in ice, their faces locked in expressions of torment. Some girls were starved, locked in dark rooms with no food or water, their bodies wasting away as Elizabeth observed, her curiosity a perverse form of entertainment. Others were mutilated, fingers sliced off with a blade, faces slashed with knives, bodies torn apart by tools designed for destruction, their blood pooling on the cold stone floor. The castle's dungeon became a chamber of horrors, its walls stained with the blood of the innocent, its air thick with the stench of death, a place where Elizabeth